Go. It's real. 3 seconds in. It's Tuesday, which is not the typical day that we record anything as far as THN goes, unless we have some sort of guest accommodation where maybe schedules don't quite line up like they're supposed to. But we're here because this is episode 001 of ArachNerds, brought to you by FulviusApparel.com. You need hats, you need shirts, hoodies, because hoodies, it's actually, I don't know about you, but it's cooling down here fairly quickly, and I hope it sticks around because it's been nice in the mornings when it's like 68 and just not be sweating immediately as soon as I walk out the door.
Yeah, it's been like the 50s over here in the morning.
I think my buddy Ryan Cox, he's in Kentucky. He was hunting the other morning. He said it was like 48.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm hoping it sticks around. I'm hoping it's here to stay because I'm so tired of the heat. I'm in South Carolina, so the humidity is brutal. With the heat on top of that, it's like a giant steamer, and so I feel like I'm constantly just boiling alive, like a lobster or something. But Fulvius Apparel, all the stuff you need. Use the code THN at checkout. Get 15% off your order. That's the exclusive promo code for THN listeners and viewers like you. Recently added some Bacillotharia stuff because, as we'll get into here shortly, I love me some Bacillotharia. And there's going to be more to come for sure. I've got some ideas kicking around in my head for some other invert related stuff. So check it out. And then, episode 1, we're here. I figured, so this is kind of odd for me because there's sort of a crossover of sorts where, like, in reptiles and stuff, THN has been around for a while. I do a lot of snake and herp related podcasts, and I've been kicking around the idea of doing an invert show for a while. And then recently, going to Daytona, coming back with some spiders for the first time since, like, I don't know, 2018 maybe. Really sort of reignited my interest and love for inverts, especially tarantulas and scorpions in particular. And then I figured now's probably a good time to kick it off. I was doing the ChondroCast for a while, and that really tapered off over the years just because I found it to be fairly repetitive in terms of the content. Like, when you're hyper-focused on one species in particular in a genus, your scope of things you can really cover is fairly limited. So I think I finally decided to kind of retire that one, and in its place, bring ArachNerds around. And then, since there's not a ton of people in our circle that are big into inverts, I was like, who can I have join me? Who's the perfect person? Like, the person that I want to talk to about spiders all the time. And it's you.
Yeah.
It just worked out. It just the timing was right. And I'm excited to get into it. We'll sort of dive into sort of why we're doing it. But you go ahead and introduce yourself. I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. So I'm basically, my name's Nisarg. I'm a longtime invert keeper, although I don't keep anything right now. I'm more of seeing them in the wild currently, kind of going similar to herping. I call it spidering, kind of see them in situ, but looking to pick up some in the near future. But yeah, I've been keeping for right around a decade or so, or more. It's honestly hard to keep track, similar to like how I've been like keeping herps. It's been a while, and I've been on the academic side of things as well as the hobby side of things. So yeah, yeah, I'm really excited to bring this podcast to you guys. I know, as Justin sort of hit on with um, with with the arachnid side, it seems that people in the arachnid side of the hobby, they do. It's quite common to see them keeping herps or reptiles. However, it's not the same the other way around. all the time. Most people that I've talked to who are heavy reptile keepers, they don't keep they don't keep arachnids. Some show interest in it, some don't. So yeah, as Justin kind of said, like this would be a great podcast to kind of bridge the gap between the two.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we're aiming to do. It is like sort of being in both camps in a sense, and I mean I won't talk about it like I've always been in both camps and been active in the invert world for the past 15 years or whatever, however long it's been since I got into inverts, but definitely sort of seeing the disconnect there between like me getting excited about different scorpions and some spiders, and then my snake buddies being like, with nomenclature, because that's where I picked up pretty much using nomenclature almost exclusively for a lot of stuff, was because of my time in inverts, because that's a world where common names and stuff like they exist, but usually a species has so many of them that they're not really used as often. So in that regard, it kind of is a weird habit formed because of it. But it's just been, it's funny to see, Jake, who's my co-host with THP, he's not really into the spiders and stuff. And so when I'm rattling off, scientific names and stuff, I just kind of get the eyes glaze over, and I can tell it's just, it doesn't have the impact that it does for me. So it's cool to also meet other people that are into inverts as well. Phil Wolf, who I do snakes and stogies with, he's big into scorpions. I don't think he's kept much in the way of tarantulas, but I know he's definitely kept a lot of Androctonus and Deathstalkers and that whole group. So him and I have talked a lot about scorpions. We've had some snakes and stogies episodes on scorpions, nothing super in depth, but he's big into the desert, especially African stuff. Africa's kind of his jam in terms of snakes and inverts and things. So it's kind of funny to see that you get crossover into one, but it's not too common to have crossover into the other. Like it's almost like a one-way street kind of thing. It's odd, but I think it'll be good. The reason we're doing this, or the reason sort of I wanted to do it, was just because I noticed that the crossover part of like we have a platform to be able to do it, and I feel like do it well, given sort of the history of THN and what we do now, but also helping to sort of get inverts out there a little more. I think there are invert podcasts. I know Tom Moran does one that I listen to on a fairly regular basis. Like definitely not trying to step on toes or anything like that, which kind of makes me laugh because it's the internet. Like there's no such thing as a confined space on the internet. Like it's infinite, so there's space for pretty much everything and everyone. But we have the platform, we have the infrastructure, if you will, and you have a lot of connections in terms of like academics and things, and I have my handful and my inklings that I can provide, but I think it'll be good. I think it seems like there's already a lot of interest from our friends that aren't even really into inverts, but they're anxious to hear about it. And it'll be cool to hopefully bring more of the invert stuff to the reptile community. They always have kind of gone hand in hand in a way. Again, just not, it doesn't go both ways. It's sort of a one-sided thing, but they've always sort of been in that same realm in terms of like weird pets. A lot of the people that are into them seem to be very, very similar personality wise and sort of like from a psychological standpoint. So I think it'll be good to do it, and it kind of helps me get my fix. I am limited on what I can keep in terms of inverts. I do currently have a collection. It is not big. It's 2 Regalis, 1 Metallica, 1 Striata, 1 Brachypelma classy, and then I got Avic fairly recently within the last 2 or 3 weeks. And then I have one Vehovis carolinianus, I'm sorry, out of a group that I had that I collected when I was up in North Georgia a while back. So down to it's a small group, but it's hopefully we can convince certain significant others that it can grow some. I would at some point. I never bred anything, so when I was heavy into it, and I was keeping a lot of stuff, I never bred any spiders. I bred some scorpions, but tarantulas I never bred, and it wasn't until I sort of started scouring YouTube, over the last couple weeks, the channel Dave's Little Beasties. He talks and shows his breeding process and stuff, and it's really cool. And I really would like to try it at one point. I'm not even super particular about the species. I just want to, I want to experience it, and it just seems like a really cool process to. Eventually, hopefully that happens. We'll see. But
yeah, definitely. I mean,
is my internet already playing games?
Nope, I think you're good on my end. I can hear you quite clearly.
Okay. Mine just did the little wheels of death. My internet's been, I don't know if it's StreamYard or my internet, but it's been struggling. It struggled last night when we were live.
Yeah, but I'm excited for you to get breeding too in the future, because I really want to hear your take with you having already bred snakes. I know with tarantulas and inverts especially, some of them can be quite a bit more finicky than others. So whenever the time comes to talk about that, I'm very interested in hearing it.
Yeah, and I mean, if the stars align just right and my two Regalis end up being a pair, then that'll likely be that's what I'll go for, because I really do love Bacillifera. I have an ornamental tattoo that I've had for a long time. It's not new, and it's a genus that I really do love, and I've enjoyed keeping, and I've had previously, before my hiatus from inverts, I kept a lot of Bacillifera. I kept a good chunk of the species that were available at the time. And this whole thing of sort of coming back into it, and I mean, admittedly, I'm coming into it hot and heavy. I got the itch bad. Dude, it came back, and I was just like, I've missed it so much. Oh my God, it's so awesome. I've missed it. I missed having spiders. And yeah, it's accelerated quickly, but I just forgot how cool it was to have them and how interesting they are, and just the variety, how they're all so different but also so similar is just super fascinating to me. You can have things from different biomes, but they all sort of operate in a very similar manner. The basis is the same, the foundation is the same, but everything else about them is different. So I had a train of thought and it's gone.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, tarantulas are pretty diverse. A lot of people think it's just a spider. I mean, it's as easy as keeping a spider in a box full of dirt. It's actually quite a bit more not quite a bit more complicated than that, but a bit more complicated than that, especially when you get into different genera out there. You obviously have tropical species, you have arid species, and what some people don't realize, you have montane species that can't be kept at certain temperatures. For example, at some point we'll get into we'll get into the higher elevation species, which I've heard of some people keeping them in wine coolers, for example, just so the males don't go sterile, or they're able to grow in a healthy manner and then to get to breed in there. So tarantulas and scorpions too, arachnids in general, are a lot more complex than we give them credit for. And
Definitely.
and similar to in herpetoculture, where there's all these tricks you have to get in, fine tune, especially with chondros. I don't have experience with them, but a lot of my friends keep them. There's tips and tricks you need to understand how to keep them properly. Obviously, I've heard that babies are finicky and things. For some species, it could be similar. I'm not saying it'll be on that level, but it is especially when it's a newer species in the hobby. It can be a kind of a little bit of a game to kind of figure out, all right, what is a species like? Because there's not always geographic data coming with said species in the hobby.
Right. Yeah, and it's so interesting too how even within the same genus, you get a different flavor inside of that. I'm going to talk about Bacillitherian and ornamentals a lot because, again, like that's what I have probably the most experience with in terms of keeping in spiders. But even within that genus, keeping Regalis versus keeping what's now Vittata. I had it when I had it, it was Pederseny. Like those are sort of personality wise, and I use the word personality loosely, but like those are not quite the same. Like I found Vittata to be considerably more high strung in a way in comparison to Regalis. Even right now, like that little Metallica that I have, and granted, it's the only one I've had ever, and it's most likely not going to be the last because that thing's awesome. And it's still tiny. Like that little Metallica I've seen that spider more than probably any other spider I've ever kept. Like it is always hanging out. Like it's always out of its tunnel and burrow. And then like the striata that I have, which is a young female, like that's probably one of the shyest species that I've kept as far as Bacillitherium go. Like I can't think of another species out of what I've had, which the rundown is I've kept Ornata, Subfusca, Regalis, Vittata, or I said Ornata, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fasciata, and what else? I think that might be it. I know I had multiples of Regalis and Ornata because I loved Ornata. Like in terms of the color and stuff, in terms of look, like Ornata was the one that did it for me the most. And I love Subfusca too. But out of all of them, I think it seems to me so far, and granted, it's a single animal, so it's hard to base sort of an overall experience of a certain species by a single animal. But from what I've seen so far, that striata has been considerably more shy than really any of the other species that I've had in that genus. So it's just cool to see sort of the differences in the within a genus. And there again, like with tarantulas, there's so many flavors within a single genus. Like Brachypelma is a good example. Like look at all the options you have there. And again, like the make is the same, but the model's different. It's just, I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with your Poecilotheria, have you? I've kept all but probably Hanuman Villasamica, and I've noticed. I haven't kept many of each. Well, for some of them are more photosensitive than others. So whenever the lights were on, I would never see it, or I would only see it during when it was hungry, when it was like kind of splayed out and it's cork bark, and that's when I knew I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and feed it. But the moment I would turn on the lights, they would spook. So yeah, definitely interesting to see between the species, especially like species as close as range as Poecilotheria. It's very cool to see how their different adaptations act, especially in captive situations.
It's interesting too in keeping a lot of herps and then also keeping a lot of inverts. I don't know about you and other people, but my taste in inverts in terms of like geography is very similar to my taste in herps. Like it's odd. I have a very big thing for Indian herpetofauna. Like obviously there's not a whole lot that we can keep because none of that stuff's getting exported anymore. But like in my opinion, India has the best boiga. India's got a lot of, if I was keeping cobras, there's Indian stuff's awesome. They're vipers as far as like Echis and Deboya and things like that. It's just funny to see, because my other thing is like Mexico. Like I have Baird's rat snakes. I love the Mexican Baird's rat snakes in particular, and getting sort of with this classy that I got recently, like really coming to appreciate Brachypelma because I feel like I didn't before. Like when I was heavy into things, Brachypelma, like New World stuff really just didn't do a whole lot for me. So I was, I never really gave it its due, and getting this classy and then digging deeper into the genus and stuff. Like now it makes a little more sense. And maybe it's because I'm older. But looking through that genus and seeing things that I knew were there before, but never really paid much attention to. Definitely sort of piques my interest now. Eratum was a big one that I always wanted and just never got a hold of. But the more I see him, same with the Phonopelma. The more I see him, the more I'm like, okay, like, yeah, it's not super sexy. It's not blue. It's not purple. But still cool in its own right. And it's the same. It's become the same with native herps for me too. Over the years, as I get older, I just come to appreciate the stuff we have in our own backyard more and more. And I think a Phonopelma, seeing those in Texas a couple years ago when I went, was really, really cool. And yeah, it's just I don't know where that was going. It just kind of it'll start in one direction and then it just like scatters. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you. I mean, I think my my liking for New World species stemmed from when I was a kid. When I first started, I wasn't allowed to keep anything, but I decided to get tarantulas first before I got herps, actually, or right around the same time, just because they're easy to hide. Most do well in room temperature, um, with caveats. And yeah, I mean, I didn't want to go into I did inadvertently get into old world species as well. But for my first order, I remember I had 8 spiders. With some of them, I need to read up again on the classification, but there was a flow at that back then it was the Phlogius species stents, and that's an Australian species. That was one of the ones, as well as a variety of Brachypelma, somewhere now Toloctocado. I will preface my pronunciation is what I think it is. I'm not saying I'm 100% right. The way my taxonomy professor always says, as long as you attempt it, that's golden. That's fine. Nobody really knows how to say things, all the scientific words correctly 100% of the time. But anyways, I kept a lot of the New World species for the most part, just because they're as a broad stereotype, many of them are not prone to bolting as much as for example, like the larger New World species. Um, when they're younger, sure, but as they get older, they tend to stand their ground more, which is also quite nice in that aspect. But yeah, it's funny how you it's funny how you said your herp interests um, kind of aligned with your tarantula interest, because mine's actually kind of been to the opposite. Um, Currently, I keep a lot of Indonesian species. My scrub pythons, python, and short-tailed boas, as well as some South American species. Argentine boa, Hog Island. Those are all quite cool, and especially with the boas, they overlap in in areas of my favorite genus. Like I'm planning to go to Colombia next year for my 30th birthday to go look for Xenestus and Pamphobeteus, which is going to be should be a fun time. Um, there's not much information surrounding them, so I'm hoping to collect as much temperature data of like juvenile adults what I can. I'm basically going to be renting a car and kind of driving around any natural area I come across.
Yeah, that's another group, man, that like I'd see them and it's like, okay, yeah, they're cool and they're big and they're purple and it's awesome. And then, but the more you've shown me recently in terms of Pamphobeteus, you sent me a handful of pictures and stuff a couple nights ago, and I was like, okay,
yeah,
like, all right, I'm on board. Like, I'm down with it. Again, I don't know what it is about New World stuff that just I went just straight for Old World stuff. Typically, I kept some Avicularia and had some Topinocenius and Grammostola. Nothing crazy there. Never like a pulk or anything. It was mostly rose hairs or whatever they're called currently. That was, but I'm getting into that. I'm curious. What was your introduction to tarantulas? How did you get into them, and what was the first one you kept? Like, what was the initial? Like, were you scared of spiders before you got into tarantulas and stuff?
Yeah, I was basically terrified of spiders. I was absolutely scared of them. Growing up, my parents were from India, for example. Not for example, but they were from India, and they always used to tell me stories about any kind of spiders they came across. And obviously, in India, the fauna is a bit more. You have to watch out for the fauna a bit more than compared to the United States. So my mom was always very wary of any kind of spiders we came across. And as a kid, that fear kind of translated into me being kind of scared of them. But as I started getting interested in working in wildlife, which I kind of always wanted to do, but when I started working at the local zoo when I was in Chicago, I was working at Brookfield Zoo. I kind of took a moment to pause and be like, hey, if I'm going to go into wildlife, I need to get over some of my fears of keeping these animals. I mean, there's no point in perpetuating these. I don't want to call them like little like unnecessary fears, but I just believe that I need to kind of learn my approach of getting over my fears when it comes to animals is I need to learn more about them. The reason why I'm scared of them is because I don't know much information about them. So I'm like, what better way to know them than have one? And back then, as I'm sure you could attest to, Justin, it was a much different time than or in the tarantula world, in the inver world as a whole. Like there was quite a few more vendors. I remember my first order actually was 8 tarantulas because I was trying to justify the shipping cost of that.
And we got to
Of
make
the
it worthwhile. It's like buying frozen mice. It's like if I'm having to pay shipping, I might as well load up the box, like fill it up.
Yeah,
No,
definitely. And because my parents didn't know, I took all my Christmas money. I bought a prepaid Visa gift card from Walgreens, and then I called. I believe he's no longer in business. But a lot of people have been keeping for a while. This name should be familiar. Ken the Bug Guy.
yeah,
He was based in Arizona, I believe, and I called him up. I'm like, hey, I don't want this history on my phone. I mean, on my computer. And they're like, I saw you have a Flogius species. I would like that. I would like a Brachypelma amelia. I believe at the time now it's Tocata vagans. I want Grammostola pulchripes, and I'm forgetting the others. I know there was a Formictopus cancerides, another great species, and Formictopus atrichomatis, as well as probably one other. I know there was one other one. I'm blanking on it. But anyways, I basically paid for those. I skipped school and I waited on my front door because this was back when they would shipping to your hub. At least what I understood back then wasn't as common as it is now. Uh, so I waited for the FedEx package, signed for it, and had all my little deli cups prepared. I was on arachno boards back then, so you definitely know I got chewed out multiple times. The user, if anybody's on arachno boards, Poke 54. I mean, he was giving good information, but yeah, he tore me up quite a bit back then when I was a kid. But yeah, anyways, I unboxed those, and those were my first tarantulas. Kept them under my bed. It's great that they were tarantulas tend to be more nocturnal in their habits. But yeah, they were doing great. I raised some to maturity, and yeah, that was my first introduction to them. Um, Probably not the best. If you are a kid that's listening, probably want to get your parents' permission. Um, Explaining why there's mealworms in your fridge is probably better with that. Because back then I didn't have a driver's license because I was like a younger kid, so I was like walking to the store um, to get that. But yeah, that was basically my introduction to them. And through that, I was actually able to get over my fear. Although I never really handled my tarantulas per se.
Mhm.
I was more worried about the urticating hairs, which if you keep old worlds for the most part, that's not something to be worried about as much. But yeah, I was more keeping them as like if they were fish, for
Mhm.
example. But like I did in the beginning, I did do all the rookie mistakes. Like I kept pebbles in the water dish because I'm like, oh, I don't know if they're gonna drown or not. Quickly cleared up those errors, and yeah, thankfully a lot of tarantulas, especially the ones I started with, they're very forgiving in their
Mhm.
nature. So yeah, that was basically my start, and then it kind of exploded from there.
I think I got one of the mystery boxes from Ken the Bug Guy,
Oh, nice.
and I remember thinking that it was going to be mostly smaller stuff, like young stuff. And so I was like, this will be cool. I opened the box, and he sent a very large Kylobrachys. I think it was a Discalus.
Ooh.
And I remember, like, I didn't know. I was completely unfamiliar with them. Frankly, I was kind of underwhelming. It may have even been a male. It was very leggy for its size. And so it was fast. It was angry. And I was like, this might have been a mistake, because I think back then, a lot of places seem to give you the option now, but back then I don't recall if it was like, I just want old world, I just want new world, send me a mix. I think he did have options, and maybe it was more so by like experience level. But yeah, that Kylobrachys, because I also got my first Dune Scorpion in that box too.
Oh, nice.
Which I didn't think I would enjoy that much, but that Dune Scorpion was probably one of the coolest species of scorpion I've ever kept. Like those, I gave it some of the excavator clay, and that thing just went to freaking town, man, and made itself like a whole little system. I kept it in a small critter keeper and watched that thing go. And I'm trying to remember what else came in that box. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I loved the whole mystery box thing, and I still think it's really cool. But yeah, I mean, mine was similar. I wasn't a big fan of spiders either. And then in high school, one of my best friends at the time was getting into spiders, and we'd kind of messed around with like some widows we had caught and kept those, and that kind of, I was like, okay, these are actually pretty cool, and I still, wasn't crazy about going much further with them. And then I got him a tarantula for his birthday. It was a rose hair from a local pet store. And he kept that for a while, and looking back on it now, he kept that thing completely wrong. It was in like a giant aquarium. It was kept way too wet. And I think that thing was just stressed pretty much constantly. It didn't give it many hides and stuff. And so he had that for a while. It was probably, I don't know, a year or so. And then he was like, hey, I'm getting rid of the tarantula. Do you want it? And at first I was like, maybe. And then kind of thought about it more, and I was like, all right, sure. And I had that for a while. But then I was actually, when I was driving home from work earlier, I was thinking about it. And the very first experience I had was, in terms of tarantulas and keeping them, was like early 2000s. I don't remember what it was that possessed me to want a spider, because I had completely forgotten about this until I started digging through my memory bank. Somewhere or another, we ended up at some rescue of sorts when we were living in Virginia. This was like Chesapeake.
Oh, nice.
Again, circa like 2000, sometime between 2002 and 2004, probably 03. And we went there because I wanted a tarantula, and this lady because that was the first time that I had heard of a house snake. It was the same people, because we were going there to pick up something. Maybe my dad was getting a corn. I don't remember, but I think she ended up saying, if I recall, you guys want a tarantula? And we were kind of like, no. And then she showed it to us, and it was a massive, like the biggest rose hair I have ever seen to this day. This huge rose hair, and she just gave it to us, and we took it home, and we put it in a small tank, and we put it on top of the freezer/fridge we had in the garage, because all the corns and stuff were in the garage at the time, and it was climate controlled as best as it could be. And frankly, we did not pay much attention to that thing, hardly at all, but it did great. We threw some crickets in there periodically. It did awesome. It was just a massive female. But I remember when we were there picking it up, or like we were there at the place, she was like, oh, okay. She's like, well, I got an ornamental here. And granted, at the time, I'm like, I don't know, 12. She's like, we're not going to give you that one. Those are too much. And I was like, okay. And then she was like, well, I got a house snake too. She's like, no, that one's really bitey. And so that was my first introduction to house snakes, which I only just got at Daytona as well for the first time.
Nice.
But it was funny because like I had that giant rose hair as a kid, and I was like not necessarily terrified of it, but it was definitely one of those things where it's like, I'm not going to go in there and try and see it and play with it. Like it can sit there and it'll be cool. And so it wasn't until high school that I got that rose hair from my buddy. And then I was like, after not long, actually, like in keeping it for a couple weeks, I was like, okay, these are actually pretty interesting. and started going down the rabbit hole, found arachnoboards, ended up getting a Pteronochelus cordatus from the same local pet store that I got that rose hair from. They would get in stuff all the time and have no idea what it was. They were like, I remember like the first post I think I made on arachnoboards was a picture of this cordatus. And I was like, I have no idea what this is. They said it's like a Kilimanjaro mustard baboon. I don't know if there's any validity to that. And people were like, yeah, it sure is. And I had that for a while and I kept that wrong too. Like thinking back now, like I kept that way too wet as well. And it did not do great. I feel like it kind of struggled the whole time I had it, honestly. But so from there, it snowballed, and then I got into scorpions and more tarantulas, and it got to a point to where I was pretty much keeping nothing but inverts. I had a couple snakes, like maybe less than 5. Like I wasn't keeping herps for a period. It was all inverts pretty much exclusively. And then I got to a point to where I was just kind of burned out on all of it. I had rebuilt up a collection of herps and stuff on top of all the inverts, and ended up kind of getting out of. I took a break from the hobby for, I don't know, probably a year or so, and then got into cresteds and everything ramped right back up again. And here we are now. That was like 2016 that I sort of got back into things, and now it's pretty much entirely snakes, and then the handful of inverts I have. But I was also, again, I was not a fan of spiders really up until that point, but it wasn't until I started keeping them that I was like, these are actually really fascinating. And the more I read about them, the more I wanted to know. And then you start seeing things like cobalt blues, ornamentals, OBTs, like all that stuff. It just, you see it and you can't help but dig for more information on them. And
I definitely agree.
Now it's here we are.
I do want to pose this question to you as someone who just got, or like recently got back into the hobby again, especially when you were given like mature female, or what I assume is mature female, a rose hair before, from whereas now, since Chile closer imports, now like a mature rose hair or Grammostola rosea can go for quite a pretty penny now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're hard to find because they went from being imported by the hundreds, if not the thousands, to now it's like, all right, I've seen, last time I was browsing site a couple years back, a sling, not an adult, but a sling still hasn't even like gained its juvenile colors for like $45-50.
Wow.
That itself. And that, I remember back in the day, I'm like, I could have bought like 2-3 adult rose hairs for that, like at that price. So the evolution of the hobby in itself is it's mind blowing to me. I mean, like, I still kick myself sometimes. I'm like, oh, I always thought, I'm like, oh, this species is going to stay cheap. So I guess you could draw parallels to the herp world, where like this species is going to be cheap and everything. But the moment
they're not going anywhere, I'm not worried about it. I'll get them in a couple years, no big deal.
Yeah, and then they jump into price. I mean, granted, it's not like the pricing as when it comes to herps. Like some could get to a couple $1,000s, or even like that. Like for example, like I'm getting into scrubs, and I keep on hearing on these podcasts how they were like quite cheap before on importers tables and everything, and now they could be in the high hundreds, almost to the thousands, to a couple thousand, depending on the quality, the locality. With tarantulas, it's more so like going from like the $10 to $30 range, jumping into probably like $200-300, depending on the age, size, sex, and it's really, and it's just really astounding to see it. And then some species stay the same. Things like Pamphiledius ultramarinus, some Synesthus are going down, but for the most part, they're staying stagnant due to difficulty in breedings. But it's just very interesting to see the market and comparing it to drawing parallels to with reptiles.
It does not seem to be nearly as cyclical as herps are. Like there's certain things that just due, again, to what you were saying, the difficulties in reproducing them, but also like the regular availability. So the supply and demand factor seems a little more sort of concentrated with inverts than it does with herps, because it's a little more reliant, I would think, on import export, and the availability of being able to get some things in on a regular basis. With herps, like a good example of that is the Atheris ceratophora, the Usambara bush vipers. Early 2000s, like those were not hard to get. Like those were fairly inexpensive. They, from what I'm told now, like they really didn't do great in captivity. But they were, they were obtainable. Like they weren't hard to get. They didn't cost an arm and a leg. But now you can't find it. Like I haven't seen a ceratophora for sale. And granted, I haven't really been purposefully looking for those, but I haven't seen one for sale in a very long time. And I think the last time I did see some, the price was just insane for compared to what they were. And that's strictly just because like the borders and stuff close up and they stop exporting and things like that. And I know like tarantulas, we've seen it, Pacilitharia again, like this whole thing of sort of coming back into it, man. It's like waking up after being asleep for 10 years. It's like when I was heavy in it, like you could get ornata, you could get vittata, you could get fasciata, you could get subfusca. Like none of it was a problem. It was great. And then I wake up and it comes to find like my beloved ornata I can no longer get unless I know someone in South Carolina that happens to breed some. And it's weird because there's also, again, like there was also some species that I remember seeing available regularly, and now it's like, where'd they all go? Like they're gone. Balfouri and stuff were like crazy expensive at the time, and now I look and I'm like, this is insane. Like slings are $60. Metallica, like I never kept Metallica because Metallica was just out of my tax bracket. Like when at the time Metallica were still expensive, and now they're slings are. I got my sling at Daytona for $100, and I've seen them even less than that on Morph Market and stuff too now. So it's weird because those were species that I remember thinking almost like the rhino rat snakes that I keep as well. Like seeing those in the early 2000s, and like that's always going to be expensive because no one has them.
Yeah, I definitely.
But then over time, more people get them, and then the ball starts rolling and it grows, and now they're readily available, and it's awesome to see. Like I'm not complaining about it at all. I think it's great that those species are readily available now, especially Metallica, because I mean that's arguably one of the prettiest spiders on the planet, and they're not unobtainable. They're not so rare that you can't afford them or you just can't find them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I remember when Metallica first came into the hobby. This was when, because I grew up within proximity to Tinley Park, so I always used to go to the NRBC, but I always kept it kind of low key. Didn't really know anyone over there, kind of. And they used to have Michael Jacoby. I believe it was him that held kind of like an after hours or before the actual Saturday Sunday, kind of like a spider talk kind of thing. And then I remember there was a raffle, not a raffle, but a guessing game of like we would walk around this table and we would guess how many Metallica are in this kind of like enclosure because they're all young. I believe it was, if my memory serves me correctly. And then whoever got the number exact, you would get a free sling. And that was big because this was back when they were like $450, which is a lot of money. And yeah, I know that with reptiles, it's kind of like, okay, I know some people think it's more justifiable. I mean, I guess it can be more justifiable.
More so when you know the sex of something. Like if you're buying it, you know what you're gonna get. Like that's the crapshoot with tarantulas.
Yeah, definitely, especially with species from like Poecilotheria or as baboons, or even those like fast growing species where the males don't like. There's some baboons like Idiothelli mira. It's a trapdoor species, gold and blue. It's beautiful.
That was the last species I kept back in like 2018 when I was saying like that was the last thing I kept was some miras.
Yeah, those are amazing, and like I've heard of like males maturing within almost a year. And when you're forking out as much money as you are, I mean, like I'm gonna say, like, it kind of sucks, especially if you're at the time you're just a keeper and you're not a breeder. yeah, it kind of blows. I mean, like there's things you could do to like prolong, um, you could keep males a little bit cooler.
Hmm.
You could, I would keep them on the bottom shelf, limit feeding as much, feed the females more. But even then, even if we want to attempt to breed, especially with a baboon species, you just kind of had to buy from different egg sacs
Hmm.
because at that point, buying from the same egg sac is not the same as like Pamphobeteus, for example, whereas you can grow them slower, and then you may have a male and
You
a
buy
female from the
yourself some
same sac.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, but that genus presents its own trouble with
Hmm.
having very difficult processes to breed in the United States. Europe has it down on lock, but when they're in the transfer hobby, you're not as open to sharing secrets
Hmm.
about breeding, which is why with Pamphobeteus and Nestus, we're kind of reliant on Europe for the most part on producing them and importing them in, which is why like Ultramarinus and similar species still are relatively the same price
Hmm.
for the most part. But some baboon species are easier to breed. Like you mentioned, Monosyntropas balfouri. Um, yeah, that plummeted in price,
Yeah. But I mean,
and now
you see the rates that they're reproducing and the size of some of these communal setups that people are having, and it really comes as no surprise that that the bottom would fall out in terms of availability, and all of a sudden they're everywhere. It's
yeah,
only a
and
matter of
same
time.
yeah, and same thing as Harpagtail pulcharps or
Yes, that was
pulcharpies.
another one. Like I was really interested in those, and I was like, man, these are expensive. And now I look and I'm like, everyone has them for sale.
Yeah, or
Like
even as
every.
freebies I've seen sometimes, which is wild to me because I'm like in my head I'm like as much as I love New World species, a nice gold and blue colored tarantula will always pique my
Mhm.
interest. And that those were gorgeous. And even like even with Metallica, I remember back in the day when people tried to uh, pawn off an older Metallica as a new variant, because as they get older, the mature females they lose the blue coloration a
Mhm.
bit. And then there's
I
someone
kind of
like,
like it.
oh, yeah, it looks really nice, and that's why
I
people
like
were
it.
pretty confused. They're like, "Oh, what is this like duller colored metallic, quote unquote duller colored Metallica?"
Yeah.
And it was just a mature female. I'm like, that is gorgeous in
Mhm.
itself, and there's a reason why they're like, yeah, they've dropped in price, but they're still like $100 for a sling is still like,
It's up there.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's up there definitely.
Yeah. I again, I'm hopefully I can get my hands on at least one more because that was a species that I had always wanted, but it wasn't in the cards, especially when you're a high school kid with a sort of entry level job at Walgreens, which is what I had. Uh, Even though, man, I look back now in the days of disposable income and minimal bills, it's like, oh, I did a lot of damage then, but if I had known then what I know now, like, oh, it would have been rough. There wouldn't have even been a bed in the room. I would have slept on the floor or something. But it's interesting too to see all the coming back and seeing all the changes in terms of like, where'd all the haplopelma go? Like, what happened to those? Like, you know, brachypelma, some of that stuff is now however it's pronounced.
Yeah,
I tried to read it like 5 times and still can't figure it out. Um, it's just it's again, it's like waking up after being asleep and everything's different and everything's changed,
yeah, I
but it's also
definitely
still
agree.
similar.
Especially, it's even for me. I I like to think. I mean, whenever new paper comes out, I try to read it and
Mm-hmm.
and just try to be on top of it. I do message some people like, for example, um, when it comes to the Asian arboreal, like the Southeast Asian for like Cereopagopus,
Mm-hmm.
similar species. One prominent name in there is Walker. I apologize if I pronounced your name correctly, Walker von Worth. Uh,
Yeah.
he's he he he's big into that. I'm thankful that he's like very easy to talk to. He's really cool, down to earth. If you ever have a chance to talk to him, highly recommend that. He's a wealth of information, but he's done a lot of work to also just kind of like help narrow things down with that kind of break it down so to say, because yeah, I agree. I mean, like back in the day, I remember my sister used to live in St. Louis, and there was a pet shop near her all the time. They would get in Haplopelma species this, Haplopelma species that, and when she was coming home, they would like grab it for me. Like I don't like, I've never heard of that, but it'd be like a new common name. Like I'd be like, grab it for me. I want to see what it is. And needless to say, I would always like shit bricks because the moment I would get it, it would be like a mature female crammed in this little thing, and I would just be like, oh god. And this is back in the day of before there was nice enclosures. A lot of people were worried about seeing them. We would keep Haplopelma, and do you know those like Home Depot buckets? They're like the 5 gallon buckets, the purple, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the orange ones. We just keep them in there. And uh, we would just like fill it like because that had the depth that we were
Right.
looking for. And we would just keep it in there. And so every single time I would open it, I would just do like a silent prayer, say, I hope you're not by the lid.
Yeah.
I hope you're not by the lid. And then rehousing them with their own completely
Oh,
different thing.
dude. Yeah,
I'm
dude.
not sure how you.
When I had some live in them, and I had one Von Worthy, and those things, man. Every time it was time to rehouse, it was like that Ben Affleck meme where he's standing outside smoking, just like,
Yeah.
oh my god.
Yeah, and like I would do this all in like either I was living in an apartment with a roommate or I was doing this in my house without anybody knowing. And I'm like, I can't let this animal get loose. I can't. And um I don't know how you rehouse them, but one of the big ways I would do was the flooding method. Um so instead of digging all the way because I was always kind of anal about trying to not harm her or stumble upon an angry ass spider.
Yeah.
Because this I'm not sure in my like monkey brain or anything like that if I am fine with a defensive short tail python, a defensive scrub python, a defensive boa, reticulated python. I've worked with them back when reticulated pythons were like wild caught a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Though that's one thing, but a rear I will not forget the first day I got a threat posture from a tarantula, and that scared the ever living shit out of me. There's something about that. I'm like, yeah, I think I'll handle the 10-foot retic over you because
Yeah.
I don't know what yeah, just the way they stood the ground, which was like I learned that I like and like after a while I gained appreciation for that. Like, wow, I'm like this is like really like like it's astounding the small animals like giving this defensive posture to
Mm-hmm.
something like me. And then I kind of learned I'm like, oh, if they do that, it's easier to kind of cup them, kind of move
Right.
them.
Because they're not
Much
moving.
yeah. So yeah, it's it's looking back on it, it's a lot of fond memories of the trials and tribulations back when the hobby wasn't as big. And it was like secluded to arachnid boards because Facebook wasn't that big back
Right.
then. And whenever you post on arachnid boards, it was like, oh, it was never that like, oh, you did the right thing. It was like, no, you're a dumbass, or a bunch of other comments
People were
from
very
people.
blunt.
Yeah, like going back on like back when like because we were talking about like how you mentioned like oh keeping transfers incorrectly sometimes back when keeping transfers on vermiculite was a thing, just straight vermiculite, and it's just wild to see how the hobby's progressed over the time. I'm very glad for it. I'm glad that there's a lot of new people. As much as I would like for it to stay smaller so the prices stay cheaper, um, I'm just happy to see how much the hobby has grown. How like watching some Facebook groups. I used to admin some groups, just seeing how people get over their fears,
Yeah.
getting into them. That's really like uplifting and kind of like I don't know. It's just, as corny as it sounds, it gives me a warm feeling seeing that people are into these little eight-legged. Um,
Yeah, no, I
they're like
get it. It's the
sponsors,
same with
but yeah,
snakes, man. When you see people that are like, I was terrified of these, and now I bought my first ball python or corn snake to get over my fear, and now I don't even understand what it was that I was scared of in the first place. Like it just completely, it's odd. It's the opposite of what you think you should do to get over the fear of something is to get into it as a hobby or something. Because I don't know, with tarantulas in particular, it gets to a point to where it almost doesn't, like, you forget that they're spiders.
hmm
I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of the same with dubia roaches. Like when I was dealing with those, you think like roaches are gross, like these are nasty, but then you keep colonies of them and you're like, these feel more like a beetle than they do a roach.
Yeah.
You know, it's just odd. Like you kind of forget that it is what it is. And then I guess that instinctual sort of lizard brain kind of calms down because you don't really associate them like you did before, unless you have a cobalt blue that decides to take off, and then that lizard brain is like, no, we're still here. This is
Yeah.
we're
Speaking
still
of a
here.
nice segue you kind of made, since the podcast is ArachNerds and not just focused on tarantulas, how do you feel about keeping true spiders or other megalomorphs?
It's been wild to see jumping spiders get as popular as they have been. That was kind of right up there with isopods. Like, I guess it makes a little more sense than isopods do, but seeing like at Daytona this year, there was at least 2 tables that had either jumping spider accessories and caging, or both. And there were people buying them, man. Like, it was my interest in terms of true spiders was always Electrodactylus.
Mm-hmm.
I found the widows just absolutely fascinating. I kept a lot of Mactans over the years and some Geometricus. And that, again, like that was another thing of like, why are people so scared of these? Like, yes, obviously it can hurt you. Obviously you can do something if you're being an idiot, but they're wildly shy spiders. Like, really don't want anything to do with anything bigger than them that's messing with them. Like, as soon as I touch them with a brush or something, like they play dead and drop. Like, but watching them take down a roach that is 2 to 3 times their size and body mass, and do it so methodically, seeing that, they're fascinating animals. Like, they really are interesting. And then there's a sort of a grace and beauty about them when you realize sort of like how gentle they are, if that makes sense, and but other than that, I mean, we have Hogna. I'm in South Carolina, so it's like the state spider. They're freaking everywhere. We've got some Nephila, which are really neat. That would be one that I, if someone was like, okay, you're gonna try your hand at keeping a true spider, what's it gonna be? It would be an orb, like one of the big orb weavers. They call them banana spiders here, but they're like the long abdomen. I don't even know what species exactly they are, but those would be cool to try out. And it's the thing that the only reason I don't really have any interest in keeping true spiders anymore is just because they're fairly short lived.
Yeah,
that was always kind of a bummer. It's kind of the same reason I never really pursued chameleons either, because it's just, I feel like you get attached to them and you enjoy them and then they're gone. Like, they kind of just fizzle, and then it's like, now what? So that's the reason I never really got into that. But scorpions were always a big part of the picture too for me. And the bulk of that was Centruroides, and kept a good bit of Androctonus, some Titius. I think the first scorpions I kept were some Troglodytes, the Haedogenes.
Nice.
I had a pair of those, and I remember trying to breed them and watching the male like put the spermatophore and stuff on a rock and then try and get the female to go over. It was really cool. Those were a lot of fun. And then a lot of Centruroides. Like, that was always, spark scorpions have always been sort of the Bacillotheria in my scorpion world. But have you done much as far as like scorpions and true spiders?
Yeah, so I'm glad you hit on scorpions. There's so much I'm excited for in the future with this podcast about scorpions. I have many people in mind that I'd love to bring on and just rake their mind about that. Because again, I think they're like I say this with as much love and respect as I love them. They're like the ugly little brother of tarantulas that not many people still keep. The scorpion hobby is, at least I believe last time I was in it, it's getting smaller than it was before. Outside of the Asian, quote unquote, Asian forest scorpions that are coming around every so often in a shipment. But I used to, actually, it was kind of funny. So I've kept Lectrodectus, mainly Hesperus. I'm not bothered by them. I started keeping them when I was a bit older, so I understood that. they weren't that big bad demon that people always came out
Hmm.
to be. Growing up in Chicago, I was blessed with being able to have quite a few universities nearby, and I would be that annoying kid that would message the professors, message the graduate students, and be like, "Hey, can I talk to you about this?" Because again, online, I don't have to talk to them in person. There's a running joke about people in the wildlife field, which I was part of for a decent part of my life. We went to the wildlife field for a reason because we're very socially awkward.
Yeah.
Um, and so the internet's a wonderful place for us. Um, but yeah, so I kept Lectrodectus sparus as well as some like unnamed species. I was big on talking to my local grocery stores and
Mm.
telling them basically, hey, something comes up, you get like fruit shipment from elsewhere, let me know. And I've gotten a couple spiders from that, not Lectrodectus, but Sparacidae, so like the huntsman,
Yeah.
for example, which let me tell you, that is on a different level. With tarantulas, it's nice because they could only go, once you understand them, they could only go front and back. They can't move side to side.
Hmm.
Sparacidae, fuck,
It's
they go wherever the hell they want. That's terrifying to
there's like
me.
a whole nother plane that we're working with in
Yeah,
terms
it's
of
like
like dimensions and
teleportation.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, but to go back to your original question, Lectrodectus, I kept Luxalis. Um, Reclusa was one of them. I'm forgetting the other species. They're really easy to set up, kind of like a plastic, like a larger like takeout container or deli cup. I I would sometimes use no substrate, and I would just like have crumpled up paper, and
Hmm.
quite a few of them back then live communally.
Are those big
So
Webbers?
no,
It seemed to me, and I mean, I honestly don't know a ton about keeping them, but they seemed very wolf spider, like Hogna,
yeah,
similar to me.
yeah,
And like the webbing is very minimal, if really
yeah,
any.
yeah. I'm trying to remember outside of just like the males making sperm webs. I don't think I've seen much, if any, but they're a great species. They're really shy. The moment you walk into your kind of like room and everything, and they sense any kind of movement, they're out of there. They're really interesting. Keeping colonies of them was great.
Mhm.
I really do want to get back into them again, but with the true spiders outside of megalomorphae, um, which are the more kind of like forgetting the exact kind of like definition, but they're the more basal species. So they're the older ones, less.
More primitive,
Yeah, it's like megalomorphae and you have Arachnomorphae. Arachnomorphae are like the typical like orb weavers, things like
right?
that spin more webs. But yeah, Keploxalis, those two were the main ones. I didn't have any interest in jumpers. Salticidae never really kind of got my interest. I'm glad there a lot of people's gatekeeping, not gatekeeping, port of entry kind of into the arachnid
Yeah,
world.
it's a good starting point because I mean,
Yeah,
I when I see them, I'll be on the porch smoking a cigar or something, and one will come, a little pantropic will come jump on my leg or something, and just like looking at that thing and watching it's so weird because it's like they're looking at you. Like there's
yeah,
almost like a genuine curiosity to them that I find just absolutely wild because you're so much larger than them, but they're like, I'm gonna go check it out anyways, and you hold them in your hand and you see them just kind of like just watching.
yeah, definitely. I mean, so the biologist in me still wants to say I'm like, do not anthropomorphize these tarantulas. So that's like one thing that's always fighting in me is my biologist side, my education, and then my hobbyist side. And so I was like, do not anthropomorphize them, and that's what you see a lot of in the Salticidae or the jumping spiders.
That's where
But
the beardy moms
honestly,
invaded from. That was the Trojan horse.
I mean, like, but whatever gets you into spiders, I'm fine with
Definitely.
that as long as. But to circle back with scorpions, it wasn't until after I kind of inherently knew, kind of especially growing with my parents being in India with the Hadantata species, that was a main talking point. I
Hmm.
was more wary of them just because I do know their potency stuff. Not taking away from their beauty, they're gorgeous. But it wasn't until I've kept them for a lot less. Like I've kept herps longer. I've kept tarantulas, and it wasn't until like 6 years ago I started keeping scorpions. Scorpions are another great species. I do think a lot of people with scorpions mistake surviving and thriving between them. You hear a lot of people just keep them in ambient conditions, which for some species that's great, but for species like Lyris, which are the Death Stalkers, and Parabuthus, which was a great love of mine, and Hadentata, they require much warmer temperatures to thrive.
Mhm.
And that's one thing I'd like to hit on in the future is the care scorpions and everything, invertebrates, and how some people tend to give kind of like a blind eye to them because they're like, oh, they're alive and they're an invert and
Right.
they're eating, that's fine. But yeah, I kept a variety of species. With scorpions, it was mainly old world. I did
Mhm.
keep some bark scorpions like Titius. That's pronunciation is completely wrong. But Centauroides, they were the ones that I bred the first. Um,
Which
um,
species?
Sculptotarsus.
Okay.
Sculptotarsus.
Sculpturatus. Yeah.
Uh, yes, there you go. I kept them. Shout out to Drew Granado and Cameron Lamb. They're some great folks that I went down to Arizona with. They took me around. We went spidering, found a variety of Phonopelma as well as scorpions. Um, yeah, they were mainly. I mainly kept the old world arid species just because it's easier. Plus, I loved, similar to how you talked about with your new world species. I loved making like designs out of excavator clay
Mhm.
and just having them go at it. And I also had a fascination with scorpions with Indian species, uh, Hadentata species, Tamulus, and then
Yeah.
there was Hadentata species, Hyderabad, and stuff like that. I love just like I was fortunate enough to meet some great people in the scorpion hobby that hooked me up with a lot of scorplings. Uh, yeah, keeping those were great. I'd really love to get back into them. It's just very hard to kind of source them now. One of my friends on Facebook, which I just found out we talked a lot in on arachno boards. I just never put two and two together
Oh.
that he's the same person. But his name is Richard. Love to have him on the show. Going to pester the hell out of him to come on the show. He had great success this season with Lyris. He did Jordanesis, which is very, very their phenotype. Um, so their like physical expression could range from jet black with like white pincers and a white
Yeah.
tarsus. That could range from anywhere from black to chocolate to even a white albino form that quote unquote albino form that I've seen. That like and yeah, he's had great success with multiple species of the genus. So that kind of sparked my interest again. I was talking to Phil about it actually.
Mhm.
I feel bad for my spammed it with a lot of photos. I'm like, look at this. This is great.
Phil
I
and I
can
will
all
never
observe that
complain
still.
about that though, because we love it.
Yeah. Uh, Still need to give him shit about saying nictitating instead of urticating, but but yeah, those species lyris are great. I have some videos I can show you because even now I don't keep, like I mentioned before, I don't keep any arachnids right now. But the way they hunt, the way they subdue their prey is great. Parabuthus I like. There's always that. I'm not sure if you kept them before, but they're the
I had a
ones that could also.
Transvalicus. I don't think they're
Okay,
Transvalicus anymore. I think they're Transvalica or something now. They changed
got
the
okay. I need
tense.
to.
I think is how you would consider that. I guess I don't know. But I had one for a while, and it was cool. You know, it was
Yeah, I had a variety of different species. Again, a friend hooked me up. Um, which I'm grateful for. Um, but I was always interested in their reputation of like, oh, they're known to spray venom.
yeah. Mine never did that.
One of them. Mine
I
never
don't
did
know.
that either. But like, I would read threads and everything. I'm like,
Yeah,
what are you doing with your scorpion that would get it? Are you pushing it to like, it's like a limit or something?
yeah. But
But
is it really a case of is it actually spraying, or is it you've just pissed it off enough and it's got so much going on
oh
that it's
no,
like pressurized in the sense to where it's like it looks like
I
it's like you would think it's spraying, but it's not.
I've definitely seen, because again, another topic I want to hit on is which I would love to have Phil on someday. Talk about with hot snakes versus hot scorpions or medically significant scorpions. The proper care that goes into it, because I know keepers that don't play around with that. They will wear safety glasses when I work on the parabuthus,
Mm-hmm.
because you never know about the individual. All of mine have been in the past. I was lucky to acquire a group of them, so a variety of age of instars, and yeah, they were great. I love them. I had Velocis, I believe it's Velocis. I had Velocis
Yes.
Oran. It was I believe it's the Afrikaans way of saying it, Oranje, Orange, or like Orange. I had that I had Granulatus. I had a variety of them. Again, I could send you all the photos of them. I used to have actually an Instagram account with just all of them. Had quite a bit of following uh, on that. I should start it back up again. But yeah, those are when it comes to scorpions, those are my main bread and butter. I did keep like a lot of Tidius, like I was saying, and Centroides. I was really fond of the Centroides from Central America.
Yeah.
Great, underrated, but I always had that kind of hesitation of because I was keeping them in. So I did it because I I had a I bought a used animal plastics enclosure
Mm-hmm.
and a radiant heat panel. So that was like my secondary containment. And I would use that to heat it. So I heated it I forgot because I had two separate ones. I had one for just the arid species.
Right.
I had one for the tropical species. And for the one with the tropical species, I think I was having trouble with like trying to not dry out so fast in
Mm-hmm.
the small enclosures and also keeping good airflow in between. Like I had a computer fan. I'm also big into plants like anthurium, philodendron. So I was keeping like a computer fan in there because that's what a lot of people use for airflow when keeping plants in enclosures, just because they should be water resistant or more humidity resistant. So I
Mm-hmm.
was using that, but then it kind of touch and go with where I was like, all right, I'm wetting this every day, which is fine. But then when I need to go out on a family trip or something like that, that's when it kind of became touchy.
Right.
So then, but yeah, that was my main bread and butter. Central Orders of Gorges. I need to get you on the Central American species.
Dude,
They're
I had a pair of Margaritatis in my hand at
oh,
Daytona
those are beautiful.
because that was a species I remember seeing a picture of them when I was a kid and thinking like that is a badass looking scorpion. And then New Moon had some at their table for like $25 a piece, and
You should have hopped on that.
I was about to, but then I was like, I struggled to differentiate males from females, and the
Oh
ones that
yeah,
I would think they were males, but then I was like, they seem a little thick, and so then I like backed off, and then I was like, I'll come back to them. Maybe I'll think about it for a bit, and then I ended up not doing it. But that's if I'm in the next scorpions are likely going to be Margaritatis, just because that's another one where like they seem to be very readily available now when
yeah,
they didn't used to be. Um, but man, Centroides, I feel it's almost like boiga and snakes. Like all the really cool species are the ones that you don't hear about and you don't even know
yeah.
exist until you go down that rabbit hole. Because that whole genus, man, is awesome. Like I kept Arizona barks and I really enjoyed those. I really like communal species for some reason with
Mhm.
scorpions. Like I'm very much into that. And I had a group of Arizonas that were a blast. Like I loved those things. I had a group of Gracilis that I really enjoyed. Um, I don't think I kept anything other than those, but like Centroides bicolor, the Margaritatis, like that
Let
Central
me put
American
you
stuff.
on
I'm right there with
Nigromanis.
you.
Let
Yeah.
me put you that. Those are stunning. I picked him up. Who did I pick him up from? Jeff Acors. Do not talk to that guy unless you know you're gonna be picking up scorpions because he works with so many species.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I remember ordering. I'm like, I just put an order in one day, and the next day I was messaging him. I'm like, oh yeah, this piece is really dope and everything. And he's like, I have some. I'm like,
Damn it. Yeah.
all right. And I'm like, that order just shipped out. Can I place another one?
Yeah.
And it's like it's wild how arachnids in themselves, they're so addicting in general.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just wild because like I'm not saying snakes are a lot of upkeep because because like for example, dogs are a lot of work.
Right.
Snakes are obviously like a lot less than that, but then arachnids are even more chill than that, depending on the species. And it just gets hard. I mean, I remember during my heyday, I probably had what 120 tarantulas and 50 scorpions, and what it wouldn't. I think I spend more time right now taking care of my snakes, which I have about 10 right now, than I did with over 150 arachnids every week, and
Yeah.
that's the dangerous part.
Well, the problem is you can keep so many of them in such a small amount of space. Like I learned that very quickly. I was like, this takes up no room whatsoever. Like this
Yeah,
is a
and
problem.
yeah, and even with keeping them in the because even even with keeping them in like the proper dimensions and everything, which could be another episode topic in itself. Again, they don't take that much space at all either whatsoever. Like I and once you kind of nail down what the requirements are, like once you know, like okay, this species comes from this area, you start out like this, no questions, just keep on like and get a go. Like oh, it's molting like this, or I don't know about you back in the day, but what I would do is I would buy because with transfer, somehow you said you never know for the what the gender
Mhm.
or the sex the sex is going to be. I would buy like 4 or 5 at a time.
Yeah.
I'm like, if I'm really interested, I'll
It's a
buy.
numbers game. Like you gotta
Yeah,
if you want the pair, like you want a guaranteed pair, you gotta buy multiples.
yeah. So I would do that, and I'm like, okay. And the moment I would be able to sex them, with tarantulas are much easier to sex than scorpions. With scorpions, I was only good at sexing Parabuthus and Lyris just because of the. I'm blanking on the actual name of them, but on their underside they have the gills
Pectines.
or the
Pectins.
pectins. Yes, there you go. And each species has their own count for those
Mm-hmm.
for what the males and females. So I was really only confident about Parabuthus and Lyris. Everyone else was just like I either had like a parthenogenetic Titius that was
Did you have Stigmerus?
yes, a lot of those.
Yeah.
I had Smithai. I
Those are cool
have
too. I've been eyeballing those.
yeah, I had a number of them. I just love. I had Titius and Jeff Acors produced Species Antilles, so they're from the same
Mm-hmm.
island as the versicolor. No, requesti. Yes, a Victoria requesti. Um, I believe it is, unless the classification changed. But yeah, I had a variety of those because my whole thing was like, if it's something new and it's a genus, like I have to have it. I
Mm-hmm.
have to know what it is. And I was always fascinated with um, undescribed species because I was a
Yeah.
nerd with. I had when I was growing up, I traded 10 Brachypelma amelia for a microscope and 2 ant colonies with a graduate student at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And then from there, I was looking at everything under a microscope. Up until
Dude,
my mom thought it was a toy and gave it away. Um, because she didn't
Formicary
know
is
I could run.
another one that I'm like
Yeah,
I don't even want to look into it because I know that I'm going to be interested enough to
yeah,
like seeing the setups that people have for those, for ants and stuff is just
yeah.
so cool.
Maki Bustos, I believe that's his name. Forgive me if it's wrong. Ant Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it.
It's amazing. Can't I will say though, people in the United States listening, our laws are much more strict to regarding ants, and I believe you can't ship anything outside of state.
It wouldn't surprise me. I know it's the
yeah,
same thing with like phasmids and stuff. Like it's
yeah.
no
But if you guys are interested, feel free to hit up Justin or myself, and we can have an episode about that. That'll be cool.
live like
Um,
yeah, absolutely.
I have a couple people in mind for that, but yeah. But anyways, yeah, keeping keeping arachnids as a whole, it's a lot of people would think it's very like kind of like not as interesting per se, but I found out it was like interesting, especially with feeding Formictopus. I'm not sure if you kept those.
I never did.
Genus.
No, that's another
There's
one that
one,
up until recently I started looking more and more at them, and I was like, okay, they're on the radar.
yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely. There's one species. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name. It's Cochleverax or something. That species is adapted to eating snails.
Oh wow.
and that's wild to me that transfer could do that. But the one downside when it comes to, I believe, in my opinion, when it comes to tarantulas versus reptiles, is new ones that enter the hobby, the collection, the locality data is not given.
Hmm.
Um, that it we could dive down a rabbit hole within ethics, for example, because many of these species come from countries that it's it's very muddy waters of how they got
Yeah.
in here. So, but so because of that, we don't know where exactly it came from, which also makes it harder to breed. So things like, I'm not saying that's with all species, but like Formictibus, uh, shout out to Tom Moran. I love that he got Formictibus on the radar for people, but I'm low-key a bit salty because they were always Pamphobeus' ugly sibling, so they were always cheap. But when he started hitting on them, they would go up to like $100, and I'm like, what are you doing, man? I'm like, this was my thing. And I'm like, I was buying these slings by like $15, $20. Nobody cared. And then like this was before I really knew of him. And someone's like, yeah, Tom Moran really made them popular. I'm like, who is this dude that did that? Um, now they're like this much, and I'm like, I have to like fight for like I'll
Damn
be like,
it.
hey, you're getting the shipment in, reserve 5 for me. But yeah, obviously I'm just kidding around. The work that he's doing, more educational on, is great. But with Formictibus, you have Formictibus species green femur, and which is synonymous with species South Hispaniola. There was a whole debate about that a number of years ago that I was really kind of fighting for. Anybody who kind of knows me from the tarantula community days, they know that I'm big onto Pamphobeus and Formictibus, and I every single time there's a question asked, I was there throwing papers at people that did not probably read the papers, that didn't care for that, they just wanted an answer. I was over explaining, but for Mixipus, that there's so many now. There's like for Mixipus species, blue violet, blue, uh, blue azul,
Which
green
is there an
femur.
explanation for that when they're labeled in that manner? Like, does that mean that they literally just don't know where they came from, or is it like,
So it's can be touchy kind of subject. It's like the collectors do, depending on the species. We don't. I have a
okay,
friend that
those are
lives
the ones that are
in,
undisclosed in terms of like where they're coming from?
yeah. So I have a
Gotcha.
friend that's out in that lives in the Dominican Republic. He's a photographer. I spent hours talking to him. He's driven around the island, kind of mapped out. For example, there's a couple species. There's a couple of the Formictibus species purple areas, which is different than the species Dominican purple.
Hmm.
And so you have purple that's found in one part of the island, Dominican purple that's found in another part of the island, and then you have another purple species found in another part of the island, and then you have green femur found in one part of the island, green species all green in another part of the island, species gold carapace on another part of the island. Then you have blue on one part of the island, the blue azul, which I'm not 100% sure. There's a paper by Macilla spiders. I can send it to you. It's great. But with the amount that are coming in label, it's really hard to know, is it a new species or is it being
Right.
rebranded for more money? So at that point, that's one of my qualms with species getting popular, especially genus or genera that are not well studied, that don't
Mhm.
have like a lot of don't like have a lot of like spotlight on them, because regardless if it's like it's hard to get those areas or it's um, a bit dangerous to get the areas.
Mhm.
It's you kind of you kind of don't know what you're working with. You're taking the face value, whereas I believe with correct me if I'm wrong, with the reptiles for the most part, it's not as difficult to get locality information when you
Yeah.
ask the person.
Yeah. Definitely. There's usually, if you see that, at least from in my experience, like if you see sort of people being vague with where something came from, like that means they likely either obtained it through less than ethical means,
Mhm.
or they're just trying to get more money out of you because they want you to, they're trying to sell it as something that it's not,
Yeah.
you know.
And that's with tarantulas. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of. I mean, with snakes, I know if you want to get down to nitty gritty, I know this is debatable as well. Scale count.
Hmm.
Um, you can look at the overall like phenotypic expression, but with tarantulas, it's unfortunately a little bit more difficult. You would definitely need a microscope. You would need to look at A phone palmar, a good example for this. You don't want to just go off of like, oh, it's on the ground like 2 feet away from me. It looks the same, so it is the same. No,
Right.
you have to wait for maturity. You could compare the molts of the mature female, and then with the males, you have to wait till they hit their mature molt and
Hmm.
until they expire, and then you could compare their pedipalps to whatever paper that is out there to describe them. There's various other things to do, but that's pretty much the more straightforward option. And yeah, so it's like a lot more limiting to that. I know that's also like one thing with the how we were talking about like, how you got back in the hobby with Brachypelma and Thlotocauda. We have some locality animals now, which are great. So Albopelosis, I'm blanking on the island they come from. There was a locality one, which is great to see because I never thought I would see like locality
Yeah.
um, with like locality tarantulas, but those are imported by Jorge Mendoza, I believe. He did that legally a couple of years ago. He's a great arachnologist. I follow him on all the publication sites. Um, he he recently, not recent. I say recently, but that's probably like what 5 6 years. Was able to import some of them. So you have then like the species, and then you have like the hobby form. Like
Right.
Albopelosis has the hobby form, which you could tell by. I believe they were able to narrow down by just like the abdomen hairs. It's
Hmm.
easy to kind of like tell based off that. So that's nice. With other species like Synestis, for example, you have species orange, species white lowland, species. But are they white? No. Are they orange? No. These names are just arbitrary
Right.
for like some of these things. So that's where my qualm comes in. So hopefully, when I go down to Colombia next year, I'll be able to map out some areas, take some photos, and share them with you guys.
What is the what is it about Pamphibedius that like what why is that what about those has gotten you so interested in them in particular?
Yeah. So just a bit of a background. My freshman year in college, I had the great opportunity. I interviewed. I worked in a lab that was studying marsupial frogs, and they were they were basically there was an opportunity to go down to South America to Peru to go down there, and that was a great experience. But through there, I was able to see tarantulas in the wild for the first time, and that was what we now know in the hobby, which is now in the hobby now. Well, in the U.S. hobby is Pamphibedius species Arania pollito, which translates to chicken spider. That was my first wild tarantula that I've seen, and that's what kind of fascinated me with them. Um, I don't want to say similar to snakes because I haven't seen like a lot of the species that I keep in the wild. I hope to
Hmm.
change that, but that's what really kind of drew me to them. If anybody knows, Arania pollito is in the Antinous, like quote unquote family. They go through actual instar stage, so they're obviously different. They're just not described yet. But but that's what really kind of drew me in to them. Um, on that trip, I didn't see any other Pamphobedia species. I did see we did come across some new species up in the highlands. Uh, they're not in the hobby um, yet, but anyways, going back, but just seeing them in the wild really kind of like fascinated me. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term fishing, like spider fishing
Yeah.
or transfer fishing. Take a long piece of grass. It's nicer in the United States because like Aphona palmar are like a nice size. It's different when you have like a Pamphobedius rushing out of a burrow to come at you. Their food drive is incredible, but seeing the Arania Poito is was like amazing, and little to what like I'm not trying to say like I'm different in any way, but like it wasn't the flashier species that got me. It wasn't the uh like species Pladioma or just the ones that end up pink or
Yeah.
red. It wasn't that, but I also have a little thing that like I definitely think the Antinous subfamily and then the Pladium or the Ecuadorian species as well as in the Colombian species. They all need to break off into different genera. There just hasn't been a lot of studying done on them. But that could be its own entire
Yeah, I was
thing.
gonna say taxonomy's own
Yeah,
series.
yeah, but that's what really kind of drew me to them, just because it was the first genus I've seen in the wild, and being there, it's like there's something about seeing a photo online compared to seeing it in its natural habitat, that kind of
Thousand
drew me to
percent.
them. So that's what I kind of went on. Arania Prito back then, they weren't in the hobby. Two people had them in Canada. Back then, I'm like, they're never going to come in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even know. So I'm like, what's the next best thing? Anything else that starts with Pamphobeus. And then Xnestus were similar. They shared boundaries a lot. They overlap in some of
Mm-hmm.
their ranges. They look similar. They're large. They're more skittish, in my opinion, um, even as adults. But yeah, so those two I kind of generally kind of focused on. Um, yes, and yeah, I just kind of made back as I got older. I try to make more naturalistic setups, which is hard with tarantulas, similar to with like snakes, because they like to uproot everything around
Yeah.
them. Um, Little bulldozers. It's great. Not so great when you put in like set up an enclosure for like 3 weeks, waiting for the plant to grow, only for them to be introduced
Mm-hmm.
and tear up everything. But also, I'm not. A lot of people say they really love heavy webbers. I'm not big into webbing. I don't know. Again, similar to back to my lizard brain, I'm not. Uh, I know about other. Obviously, like I'm aware, cognizant of other Iranian orb weavers. They're great. I respect them. But being a bald person, walking through a web isn't the
Yeah.
greatest feeling ever.
Yep.
And I've always had that kind of issue with heavy webbers. Uh, I don't like the feeling of web on me. That's one thing I need to get over myself. And yeah, and Pamphobeus and Nessus, they don't really web other than when they're like consuming a prey item or putting
Mm-hmm.
down a molting mat. Um, One thing that I've learned because I worked in Ecuador as well, um, um, it's like it's similar to like flipping tin. Like I flipped over a crate and I found a Megaphobema over there. I was over there, so it's like, um, so they're kind of like not burrow away completely. That's heavily dependent also on like the area they're found in. Phonopelma,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot different because they're more arid. But with like these like larger terrestrial and everything, they're they're relatively, if you're in the right area, they're relatively easier to find, and it's not difficult per se to find them.
Yeah, the
Uh,
Aphonopella in West Texas were definitely not difficult. Even during the day, you'd walk by and you'd see some legs sitting out of a hole, and it's just that was the first tarantulas that I saw in the wild was those.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
It's cool.
We had shit luck with a Phonopelma, other than Marksley that we found out near Sedona, or no,
Mm-hmm.
not Sedona, Flagstaff, with snow still on the ground. Um, um, I believe I sent those photos back when I was on that episode of Snakes and Togies. It was a dwarf species.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the Calicodes was a pain, mainly because I went at the wrong time. Did not plan that out at all. Well, but like trying to fish them out, I think out of like the 7 or 8 burrows we found, only 2 of them came out. Shit odds, but it was great seeing them. It's one thing again. I always kind of harp on. I don't know if this is the biologist that's in me. Yes, keeping your animals is one thing, but seeing them in the wild, I know not everyone has the opportunity to go out and do that. Be it because the snakes they keep or the arachnids they keep are found in a different country, and I know accessibility over there isn't the greatest.
Right.
But if you're able to see them in the wild, 100% recommend that. Just like it gives you a whole newfound respect for them, even if they are like just invertebrates, quote unquote, just invertebrates. Just seeing them in the wild it gives you a whole newfound respect for them.
Yeah, man. I talk about that West Texas trip we did a couple years ago all the time. Like there was, horn lizards. I always seen them, like knew about them. They're cool and all, but getting your hands on them and seeing them in person is a whole nother experience, and you don't have the appreciation for them until you see them firsthand like that. And it was the same with the night snakes. Like those things are a dime a dozen, and they were probably the one snake we found the most of. But it's like I stopped and played with every single one we found because it's just so cool. And maybe it's because I don't have those here. Like it's stuff that's as foreign to me as carpet pythons are in terms of like being able to find it. But it was awesome, and it does like it gives you this sort of weird soft spot for those species, even if it's the super common stuff. You know, seeing it in its habitat and seeing the landscape and where they're living and how they're living, and it does give you just a different appreciation and sort of view of them. In a way, it's cool because I want to go to Costa Rica really bad and see dart frogs. Like I kept dart frogs for a while, and that's one of the reasons I want to go to Costa Rica is just to go see dart frogs. You know, it doesn't even matter what species. I just want to go see some hopping around doing their thing. You know, it's nothing.
Yeah.
I don't want the rarest and sexiest thing that no one can find. Like I'll go look at a ratus. Like
100% agree. It's like it's the most common things you find also too that like give you like the most awe, like make you awestruck. Like I'm happy with the way it's progressing, the hobby is progressing, because now it's like, for example, I know Tom Patterson, Tyler, and a few other, and Richard Stewart of the Transfer Collected. They recently went to Peru on a trip. Josh Allen was a guide, I believe, and it's becoming more accessible to do that. So if you're able to, you have a disposable income. I know times are getting tough. There's tours now out there that do that. That you're able to go out to Peru. I am probably for better or for worse, due to my track record. I go solo traveling just because I don't know if there's something wrong with me, my wired head. It's like I don't like following other people's schedules. I get it. I respect other people's schedules and everything. I just learn the language and I go. It's been good. I've ran into some issues, but I tend to kind of like find find out where the good locations are, reading papers and everything. But now there's guides that actually will take you there, so 100% more safer. We'll plan it out. Peru's a big country that they do a lot of like spidering for, which I believe that's there's not a proper term for herping, like similar with arachnids. I've just been calling it spidering. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of guides over there. There's a lot of information out there. I know I'm on quite a few WhatsApp groups with Transworld of Colombia, as well as Ecuador, and then Argentina as well. So the information, like, we're in a great time for people to get into transfers with everything, be it if you want to see them in the wild or you want to like keep them. There's a lot of information out there. It's really cool. Also, I'm not sure about you, but back when we started comparing the information that was available to us back then compared to what is now, it's really interesting to see. It's like, oh, we fucked up, or we just kind of like, or like we had this down and everything. It's just really interesting with with how much the hobby has progressed, and I'm really happy to see that growth.
Yeah, I was heavy in it in the Rob C YouTube days.
Oh wow, what a name! That was a throwback.
Yeah. And seeing like back then, I don't know do people still do, like, he had the mechanical mom thing. Like, do people still do that?
Last time I checked, there was for egg sacs, right?
Yeah.
There was some. I know that. I don't know what it is, like what it's like right now, but I remember seeing like experimental like mechanical mom posts on arachno boards and everything. I was like, this is what I did, but I'm not 100% sure right now. But carry on.
Yeah, that's what I remember. That, and I think he got nailed by a big ornata, and seeing that video, and then the mechanical mom, and he talked about building that and using it and seeing the success he had with it, or lack thereof. I honestly don't remember how well it did, but now, like, again, going back to Dave's Little Beasties on YouTube, you know, like, most of his stuff, he leaves it with mom.
I think you cut off. You're completely frozen right now. Let's see.
Check, check, check.
Okay. Yep, I can hear you now.
We're good.
Yeah,
I don't know
sorry,
what it left off
you
at.
you left off right as soon as you said Dave's Little Beasties.
Yeah, I've noticed with the videos that I've watched of his, like he seems to leave the sacks in with the moms up into a certain point, kind of how we would with snakes and incubation and stuff. Sort of having an idea depending on the species of when to pull it and that kind of thing. And I don't know if that's the norm. I'm sure breeding tarantulas has come a long way since the Rob
Yeah,
C days on YouTube.
yeah. I think
And
with
now looking back on it, and not even I don't know. It's kind of like looking back on some of the snake people you used to watch on YouTube, and now realizing like how whacked they were and inaccurate a lot of their stuff was. I don't know if that's the case with Rob C stuff. I just remember that watching his stuff on a fairly regular basis.
yeah, I think right now with at least when I left off, keeping especially like because you have two fundamentally different kinds of egg sacs being produced by tarantulas. You have the baboons, which are hammock egg sacs, and then you have the New World and basically everything else, which are just keep it as a ball with them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm blanking on because I haven't really, as much as I love the baboon species, I haven't really worked with them as much just because I was always like kind of peeved with always getting the male ratio. So I was kind of
Right.
like they mature too quickly for my taste.
Mm-hmm.
But with the New World ones, as long as your microbiome within your enclosure is fine, I don't see there was never a harm in keeping with mom. The only pain in the ass was what are you going to do when all the slings hatch? Then you have to rip
Well,
apart
that's what I've
everything.
noticed. What Dave is doing is he pulls them at a certain point because he knows that after a certain mark, like they're eggs with
Yeah,
legs, and then he has his, the sort of the nursery. He gets them in that sort of transitionary period before they're fully legged, um,
yeah,
and he can sort of
and you could
monitor
definitely do
those
that.
and have more control over that. And it made complete sense when I saw the setups that he had. I was like, that works great. I think it's proven at
Yeah,
this point that it does.
yeah, I think that's like generally the most common kind of consensus. I know there is some fear of like if there are some eggs that are bad in the sack, um, the female will eat them. So some people have, especially with like newer species in the hobby, more difficult to breed species. There's a consensus of grabbing them as soon as you can when the egg sacs formed, um, just because you don't want to be, you don't want that to be the reason, like a few bad eggs to be the reason for the female to consume them. Because that's
Mm-hmm.
been definitely like I've seen posts on ArachNerds. I've talked to friends where it's like, oh, they've caught their female mid consuming the egg sac when they saw some good
Right.
ones fall out, but there's also some bad ones. So,
Mm-hmm.
so it's always like a kind of tricky game. If it's the more common species, I would be inclined to just let it go. But I'm also like, it also depends. Are you a hobbyist or are you a breeder for the most part? If
Right.
you're a breeder, then you're more inclined to like, okay, similar to like the reptile community, you want to give every egg the chance it could to become like
Yeah,
an
that's
actual.
that crossroads that snake people are at too. Of like, if it wasn't meant to be, it wasn't meant to be. Like, do you do what you can to salvage what you can, or do you let nature take its course? And mom was going to eat the egg sac anyways, therefore maybe there was something about it that I can't recognize was wrong with it, and so she made that decision for a reason.
Yeah,
Like
and and there's also the case of like with like same thing with reptiles, bad moms,
yeah,
not coiling around the eggs. But with some tarantulas, I've seen multiple posts of just like them laying down a web for their egg sac and them just walking over to the side and laying their eggs on the ground. And it's just like, all right, what? It's like, what was the reason
Psych.
got that? Because then like also like inside my head, I'm trying to think like in my head, I'm like, all right, well, we're artificially increasing the odds of every single egg. Maybe some of these animals weren't meant to be like
Oh,
alive
I mean,
at the
absolutely.
end
That's
of
what
the
me and
day.
Phil say all the time. Is like that's why mom has 50 because
Yeah.
maybe 5
Except
of
with
those are meant to
tarantulas, it's
make it
now
to
like,
adulthood.
yeah. And with tarantulas, it's really interesting. I really love the correlation between like species and the egg thing for Laciodora, for example. You can get hundreds of Laciodora eggs, but but they're a large species like Parahybana, salmon pig
Hmm.
bird eater, I believe they're called. They're getting really
Yeah,
large and
worst
everything.
herring I ever got in my life was from a parahybana.
I'm actually not that affected by them. I am affected by Brachypelma to the worst degree. I
Hmm.
would always wear gloves and everything, and that's really interesting how different people are like affected differently by different urticating areas. But Theraphosa are the resounding, they suck when it comes to their hairs. But whereas a similarly sized Pamphobedius, they lay much larger eggs in lower quantities. And the babies molt out uh, to the instar quite large. Like they're able to take down. Whereas because I'm not sure if you know the typical what like a very very young Brachypelma, Televicado, or Phonopelma look like. Like they're that tan colored spider thing with the
Hmm.
black mirror patch on them. Uh,
Yep.
Pamphobedius and Estes and all that, Theraphosa, they don't go through that stage. They skip to like already a fuzzy little spider.
Hmm.
And I think that's what I like as well, just because like they come out larger. I don't have to worry about necessarily. I mean, not that I'm necessarily worried about them being that small, but like keeping the amount of spiders I've had, you get stuck. You get stuck molts and everything. And I try when at all possible, whenever I kept them, I always kept like Q-tips, tweezers, paintbrushes to kind of help them out and everything. Especially because with the Pamphobedius that I kept, I remember when the first lot of Pamphobedius insignis, not species insignis, which are Ecuadorian false species, but insignis came in the hobby. I was the first one to get a couple of them, and one of them was stuck in their mold. I'm like, oh my god!
Damn.
I'm like, not only was I like, I'm like emotionally invested in this, like very much so into this spider. Not saying I wasn't in the other ones, but this one, it's like crap. This is one of the first. This is the first time they're in the United States and everything.
Yeah.
And I
There's some
got
pressure
the
there.
yeah, and I was able to get them get him out, but like I wasn't fast enough, so he started hardening a bit. He unfortunately didn't make it, and unfortunately, all four of them were male. Um, so nothing really came out of that. Same thing with the
Figures.
Negro color. Same thing with the Negro color I had. I know a big contention is like what causes a stuck molt, and
Hmm.
in my experience, it's just random. The tarantula either gets I know a lot of people, as long as your parameters are okay, the humidity is good for the species. I don't look at humidity per se. I just wet the substrate when it's like needs to be like wet. If it's a sling, I make sure that it doesn't dry out. I make sure the water dish is
Hmm.
full. But it's one of those things that like I I tried my best. The other siblings from the same sack are doing great, and it was just that one. So it's just like in my head, it's definitely either like exhausted itself from trying to push out of its old
Yeah.
excuvia, its molt, or something like internally that happened because a lot of things could go on in the molt. The sucking stomach
Yeah. There's a
could
lot
send
of
that
lot of
molt
moving
out.
parts going with
Yeah,
that. So I
it's not
can't
as simple
imagine
as like
to throw that off.
yeah, like I've had transfers with broken things. Not able to hunt that. I had to create like a mealworm gut soup kind of thing. Yeah, it's interesting describing this to someone who's not into tarantulas. Like I remember trying to explain to someone who one of my friends was into reptiles. He's like, so you like mushed up a bunch of crickets and mealworms and wax worms to feed to the spider? I'm like, yes, that's what I did to try to get it to survive. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's a lot harder because they are on a smaller scale compared to snakes and veterinary medicine isn't where it's at. I know some people go to vets when something's wrong with their tarantula. My personal belief, and I have a lot of friends who are vets. I've worked in some other vet fields. Um, it's not advanced enough for tarantulas. You could go there, but similar to with like I guess more so extent is like going to bring your snake to a normal quote unquote normal vet who's not experienced with
Or
exotics.
taking a goldfish.
Yeah, they're not going to know exactly what to do, and you're just going to end up with a large bill, um,
Yeah.
regardless. So it's like I know I had a number of friends in vet school who I would like talk to, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't know what we're talking about when it comes to invertebrates." They're like, "We could try to, we could try to help, we could try to do what we can, but at least at that time, I don't know what it stands right now, but I haven't seen much. If it is actually
I mean,
like
if I was a
that,
vet and someone brought that to me, I'd be like, what am I supposed to do? Like, what do you want me
yeah,
to do?
because like their entire
You
like
know?
body makeup's different. It's like we and snakes, mammals, reptiles, and everything, we have a closed circulatory system. Invertebrates have
Hmm.
an open circulatory system. That in itself poses so much challenges to in itself because you obviously can't draw blood. You can't draw hemolymph, which is what they have, not blood,
Hmm.
and you can't do any of that stuff. So it's just like there's just more questions than there is, and that's why I believe like when it comes to like tarantulas and everything, similar to like snakes. This is a debatable topic we could hit into at some point. Quarantining new tarantulas, especially wild caught tarantulas. I'm big on
Yeah, I'm
that.
very curious to
Um,
get that and talk about the parasites that affect like what can you get from wild caught tarantulas, similar to how you can get mites and stuff from snakes and worms and all kinds of things. So
yeah, and yeah, we're learning more and more about that, especially when there's more and more keepers out there. You're buying from a lot of similar to snakes. You're buying from a lot of flippers tables. You don't
hmm
know where these tarantulas are coming from. They're not coming from like for $25 for like a large adult female, like New World tropical species. It's not coming from like a captive bred born situation.
right, right.
It's coming right from I know there's like a number of places where it could come from, but it's like then you have to be like kind of smart about it and think biosecurity. My background is a lot in chytrid with frogs,
Hmm.
as well as ranavirus and stuff like that. So I'm always super anal about biosecurity, especially with my snakes. I know I was talking to Glenn, who just published his book, The More Complete Reticulated Python, as well
Hmm.
as Ish. Um, and I would get them like, hey, this is my rundown for my snakes and everything. I've like 5 different cleaning products I use, everything, and that's how anal I am. But with tarantulas, I don't use any cleaning products. I
Right.
use like boiling hot water, cleaning the tongues, cleaning everything else, just because I'm like I want to take out as much like uncertainty as there can. I don't want to
Hmm.
like spray something down. I know there was a topic recently on one of the Facebook groups. I don't know if it's Tarantula Talk, which is run by Tanya Stewart, or the Tarantula Community, which is Amy Salinas. Um, Chlorhexidine. Someone used chlorhexidine to clean all
Yeah.
their enclosures. I would be wary about that just because of chemicals. Um,
See, I don't know that one. I mean, that was used for. I think dentists use that for a long time. Like it's fairly safe, especially depending on the dilution. Like if I
yeah,
was gonna have to, if someone said I had to pick something to disinfect with inverts, it would probably be that because that
yeah.
would be the one that I would be the least worried about.
See, I would probably use chlorhexidine, then I would still boil the tongs afterwards or
Yeah.
something like that. Just because I don't know about the residual effects. I'm not a arachnologist. There are some friends I want to bring on. One who's specialized in social arachnids. She does work
Hmm.
in the Amazon. I think that'd be cool to kind of talk to her about,
Hell
pick
yeah.
her brains about. But I don't know. The research isn't there yet. There's not a lot done with that. So in my head, I'm like, I'm not trained as an arachnologist. I haven't worked. The most I've done is work on organic, have a research project on an organic farm looking at inverts. But even that, I'm just very wary about what goes on in my room. Like I'm the kind of person that I don't keep any candles on in my room, regardless for my
Hmm.
snakes or anything. I know back in the day, Poke 54, he would say, "Oh, I would smoke cigarettes while like doing work with my tarantulas and everything." And I'm like, I'm very, very like, no, nothing comes in my room with that. Even with like people coming over, I'm like, don't. Yeah, especially if you're coming from like you have animals yourselves, and
Yeah.
everything. I'm very
Yeah.
anal about that, so I'm very curious about that. Hopefully, I could get some arachnologists on here who know more than that, see what their take is on that. I know
Mhm.
Stuart Longhorn is really great. Andrew Smith is putting out some new documentaries. I know you talked to me about um,
Dude, I
the
bought the
descent.
whole catalog and I just
Yeah,
finished the Basilotheria one yesterday and I'm freaking hooked. Like he does
yeah,
such a
he's
good job with those. I started the Brachypelma one this morning or last night, and I love the fact that he dives into like the history of the people involved before he gets into the the spiders themselves. Like he gives you the whole picture, like the whole story, like going back to the 1800s, if not earlier than that, and like explains how if this person did not come to this particular area at this particular time, like who knows when we would have found these, who knows when they would have shown up in the hobby, like or been known to science. Like I like the fact that it's such a well-rounded explanation of a genus, and the importance of some of these people, and how this weird like butterfly effect stars and planets had to be in the right combination at a given time in order for some of these things to happen. Like I think it's awesome the amount of work that he put into the Basilotheria one in particular. But I'm sure all the other ones. I mean, he needs to be. He should definitely be asked for more money on those digital
yeah,
downloads than he does. Because after watching the
100%.
Basilotheria one, I was like, the $6 I spent on this was not nearly enough. Like,
Yeah,
come on,
100%.
like there's no
He's
way. Just yeah, it's wild.
the one thing I like about him is because there seems to be, I guess, even more so than with the reptiles, there's a disconnect between the academia and the hobby. Um, and he's bridging that gap because most people who do like who would talk about more of the videos, stuff like that, they're going to be more on the science side than anything else. Whereas
Right.
he's making it easily digestible for others, and I think that needs to be done because like I know whenever I was in the hobby last, there was always like when Tocado broke off from Brachypelma, um, there was always like, why are these scientists doing this? This is just
Mm-hmm.
more of a pain for us. But I'm like, that's not the big picture. It's like they're doing this not to take jabs at hobbyists. They're doing this to
Right.
better understand these things. So, and there's like a bit of a when I was working in South America, for example, uh, the arachnologists over there, there's a big disdain between the keepers and the scientists. I guess like mainly because like the black market trade for transfers is
Yeah.
large, and me being American, uh,
Mm-hmm.
not many want to respond to anything that I said because I'm like, hey, I found this new species, like cross
Right,
references
unless you have
everything.
like a resume and credentials that basically say like I'm not going to put these in my backpack and take them with me. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you kind of got to
100%.
prove yourself that you're trustworthy and someone that's not going
Yeah,
to be
I learned
shady.
to say, I'm like, I like, oh, I don't keep spiders. I don't know anything about that thing. I just like traveling to see them. And it's sad because in parts of India, especially where Poecilotheria and I believe it's Thermopius, psychedelic, like the psychedelic earth tiger.
Hmm.
Um, if you are of a certain demographic, I like if you look like European and you're like going around areas, poking around, you will get stopped and you will get. They'll be like, "What are you doing around here?"
Right.
Because of the amount of like the black market trade for that. So
Hmm.
it's not necessarily I blame the arachnologists for doing that. I understand completely, but it was a bit frustrating at times to try to
Oh, I imagine. Yeah, I
be
can.
like
I can.
I'm working with frogs on a project over here. Like I'm working with a professor who clearly said he's like this transfer's out of my realm of expertise. This is on you.
Hmm.
um, and just reaching out. It wasn't until like I sent locality information, like the data,
Yeah.
and I just did not get a reply at all.
Yeah.
Um,
That's how it
but
is with the WMAs and stuff around here. Like it sucks because you're not supposed to have a snake hook with you if you're in the wildlife
yeah,
management areas, and it's because people bagging up what they're finding, and it's really it sucks because it's like we have no interest in taking home any of this stuff.
yeah, it's
But
like
it's
the
like
few bad
if I
eggs
see a
ruin it for all of us.
yeah if I see a nice 4-foot cane brake or something, and I don't have a hook to like maneuver it for pictures or whatever, like it sucks.
Yeah, I
You know,
completely agree.
it's like, oh, there's our life for Eastern Diamondback. Awesome that we have to look at it from 8 feet away and take pictures and not do anything to
Yeah, I
document it
100%
better.
agree.
Like just it sucks, but at the same time, I completely understand. Watching when we were in West Texas, dude, there was this hatchback and there was a group of people that were riding around in it, and every time we saw them, that hatchback was open and it was just delis cram.
Uh,
Like they were bagging everything. If it had a heartbeat, they were putting it in a damn deli cup.
See, that's what like kind of like when I started joining these WhatsApp groups and everything, or like for example like Tarantulas del Mundo, which was a Colombian transfer group in on WhatsApp. Um, they were very wary of me asking any questions,
Yeah.
and completely understandable. Like it took me a while for even to show them like, hey, I'm not bringing anything
Mm-hmm.
with me or whatever. And when I do come, I just want to see them in the wild. I'm like, if you want to come with me, you can, just to prove. I don't bring my backpack. Whenever I'm looking for
Mm-hmm.
tarantulas, I don't have my backpack with me. I just have, depending on the day, a flashlight and a stick, like
Mm-hmm.
a twig. That's all I have because I know in some areas, depending on the area you're at, more towards the cities, that's when you deal with more people and everything. It's like you don't want to draw attention to yourself, and I know that Colombia is more strict with that because in Colombia, even keeping tarantulas is illegal
Really?
over there. Yeah, so that entire group is like it's a great resource, but then you also see people like posting tarantulas like, oh, I found this Pamphobedius over here. I'm like, that's a new species. You shouldn't keep it. Um, so, but yeah, it's like it's really same thing with India. It's like you can't be keeping any tarantulas in India, as
Mm-hmm.
far as I know. But I have like I'm in group chats and everything on WhatsApp that there's a Poecilotheria in someone's living room. And I'm like, people would love that over here. That'd be great to see. And everything. I'm like, oh no, it's in situ, and I'm like, I guess it is. It's just
It
hanging out by
counts.
your
Yeah.
food. Yeah, but it's just it's just wild.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, man, but that's I don't know if it's due to the internet or it was just something that was bound to happen over time, anyways. I mean, any industry, there's a way to exploit it. There's someone in that industry that's going to find a way to do it, and
Yeah,
as much
definitely.
as it sucks.
And
But I
tarantulas
give
are
props to the countries that take the initiative to do what they can to protect that. I know with India, after watching Smith's Poecilotheria documentary, it's tough because like yeah, they're making stuff ESA listed and all that, but they also like illegal firewood and illegal timber cutting and stuff is rampant. So it's
yeah.
like you're like, what's the point at that rate? Like if you're just gonna let it deteriorate from the inside, like why even bother trying to regulate it from leaving? If it's
Yeah, I I
so,
I I 100% agree with that.
the
I don't
end
know if it's
result.
just yeah. I'm like I'm not sure if it's just like me being Indian for that fact, or just like me working in some of these areas. It's like I understand the laws, but then it just becomes more of a societal issue, and it's like they're
Oh yeah, that's a
like
whole nother level to it, man. Is like some of these
yeah,
people like they depend on that. Unfortunately, like yeah, it's illegal and they're not supposed to cut this stuff down, but it's like when their family
yeah,
requires that to be able to eat. Like I can't really, from a human to human perspective, like I can't really blame them for doing it.
yeah. I 100% agree because my mom's village is in India and everything. There's a lot of like forested areas, and the big thing was like was especially during COVID, a lot of these vegetarians, or like what people say, oh, why are these vegetarians poaching or whatever? I'm like, well, what would you do if you had the opportunity? If you knew there was a black market for animals or plants,
Hmm.
would you let your family starve, or would you do the legal things
Right.
and everything? And it just becomes it dives into this whole ethical kind of thing. So it's like I'm really happy that you hit on the fact that it's multifaceted. It's
Yeah,
not
it's a
just like a
crappy
black and white
situation all
something.
around,
Yeah,
and it
yeah. And
sucks because it's.
in a perfect world, we wouldn't everything would be fine.
Hmm.
But especially like my experience, not just like in India, but just going to South America, and then when I worked in China and everything, it's like it's very there's a lot more things that a lot of people have on their plate
Hmm.
other than, and unfortunately, animals seem to always take last place
Yeah, yeah, a lot
to one
of
of
stuff
these
takes
things.
a backseat to that, and then again, it sucks because it's one of those things where it's like I can't say I wouldn't do the same thing if I were in that position,
Yeah,
but at the same time, it's happening on such a scale that it's actually causing problems for some species, and so it's like, well, what's the
100% agree.
solution to that? And you get to a point to where even if you have a solution, it may not fix the problem. Like it may be like that may just be it. Unfortunately, like we cause our own demise, and it's like be it out of necessity or not, it's gonna it's irreversible and it's gonna happen.
Yeah,
So it sucks, but
yeah, definitely. Curious to see how the field develops within the next number of years too.
mhm. And seeing, I mean, we like with the Bacillithera documentary in particular, I really appreciated the fact that like when we hear deforestation, the first thing I think of is like when they clear lots here to build houses or apartment complexes and stuff. And like, yeah, that is a degree of it. But when you see it in the context of Bacillithera in India,
Mhm.
like there's still woods and plants and stuff there, but it's not the right woods and plants
Yeah,
that those spiders need to set up shop and survive. Like there's still landscape there and there's still bushes and things like that, but there's
mhm.
not the trees and stuff that they deem necessary to survive and stuff. And then it makes a little more sense because it's like they're not clearing whole hillsides like completely bare. It's not like we're just looking at giant mounds of dirt. Like there's still forest there in the most sort of watered down sense. And seeing the difference between some of the sanctuary like protected land versus the stuff that's already been hit, you see the difference, and it's like wow, like okay, it made a lot more sense having more context to that too. And I really appreciated the fact that you see the whole picture. You did such a good job with that whole
Yeah,
thing. I can't recommend it enough.
yeah. And I think there's definitely like when I was working in Ecuador, for example, the amount of forest that was cleared right next to the wildlife rehabilitation center I was working at the time I was there. So I was there for like 7, 8 months.
Hmm.
Um, it was wild seeing how much has changed and everything. I understand the reasoning why they did that. So I'm not like harping. I mean, do I agree with it? No. Do I understand why they did it? Yes.
Hmm.
They like dismantle the waterfall to divert the flow of water.
How do you even do that?
A lot of excavators, a lot,
Takes
and
dynamite and blow it up.
yeah. If you sh- if you take a look at my Instagram, I actually have like a photo over there. But like, I think it was my first day over there, looking at the waterfall, and my last day over there. um, yeah, it's very depressing. But I understand like the village over there never had running water before,
Hmm.
and it's like it's easy for someone, especially in the United States, to be like, hey, why are you doing this? Stop it.
Oh yeah,
And because I could go to my sink right now and just
right.
pour a glass of water. Over there they couldn't, but over there the amount of damage, and I became the local go-to guy for him. Like, hey, I speak Spanish. Um, very thankful to grow up in a part of Chicago that Spanish was like a major language. I was like, hey, you see any tarantulas? You see any snakes? You see any scorpions? Here's my phone number. Here's my WhatsApp number. You call me, and I'll move it. And if anything, I'll give you like a couple extra dollars for
Yeah.
calling me. Any incentive. And I got a lot of calls for tarantulas more than snakes. It was more so they would call me for a snake, and by the time I would get there, it was already cut in half. And I
Oh,
was just like, all right, well, I'm like,
I'm
I,
not paying you to get rid of a
yeah,
body.
yeah. And I'm like, And yeah, and it was like as that is like yeah, it's like also like as like I was so excited to see like all these animals. I'm like, well, as a herper in my head, I'm not counting this, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but if I was like 5 minutes, well, with transfers and everything, uh, they're usually up. They were up on the corner of the wall or something,
Hmm.
so that was like easier. This bar I was in right next to Cleveland National Park, which is like one of the places in the Amazon and everything. You can see a area all over the ceiling. I'm like, if you're fucking closer, that would be amazing, so I can see what the hell
So
you
cool.
are
Yeah.
and everything. And even the banana plants and everything, you walk by there, they were everywhere. I give one of my friends, his name is Julian. Um, he's in med school right now, I believe. I used to give him so much shit for liking Avicularia. There was always like a battle between Avicularia and Pamphobedius. And
Hmm.
I'd be like, Avicularia, I'm like, that's just an oversized house spider compared to a
Fair.
Pamphobedius, which is like a tarantula. But yeah, no. Avicularia like are like really great. Forgot where I was going with this. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have that little. That would be a cool species to see in the wild. Is just a regular avicularia. You know, nothing
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, I'd
There's
love
something
to.
about those like pet smart species that it's
Mhm.
like it'd be cool just to see those in the wild. I don't know why. I don't know what it is about the fact that it would be neat to see those in the wild versus at your local pet smart. But like,
Yeah.
again, it goes back to like the having an appreciation for something when you see where it's supposed to, like where it's coming from. You
Yeah.
know, like
Like
the
with me,
setting
it's
it's
like
supposed to be in.
with me, it's like a bearded dragon. It's like I'd love to go to Australia one day. And I was talking to a couple of people. I believe it was Riley and Lisa.
Hmm.
Regarding about like I really want to see a scrub python. I really want to see the scrub python in particular python in the same habitat. What's the best area to go? Halmahera.
Hmm.
But I'm like cost wise, it's cheaper for me to go to Australia
Yeah,
and to see that because then you need to charter a boat, go to Indonesia, charter a boat, charter another boat, get permits and stuff like
it's
that.
a whole
That's a
process.
whole mess, and I don't want to go through dealing with that kind of mess again. And whereas going to Australia, I could just find a kinghorn eye. Yes, it's a different subspecies, but at the same time, it's like it'll get my fix. But I'd also love to see a bearded dragon, um, looking no more typical bearded dragon.
Hmm.
I always get excited about. I listen along with THN. I listen to NPR a lot. Eric's, I really get hyped hearing his enthusiasm about his Australians, like adventures in Australia. And he talks about seeing the most common species sometimes. And I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, I want to see that. It's
Yeah,
like, it's like, I don't, it's like, and it's also that realization. I don't know if you ever had it with a fauna palma. It's like, you see a common species in the wild, and it's like, why aren't you in a cage? And why aren't you in
yeah.
enclosure?
It's
Why are
kind
you
of like at
like,
first
well,
it's a little weird because you're like,
yeah, it's like
what
you
are you doing
exist.
here? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like that kind of thing. But like, obviously, like, but I still want to mark that down. But it would be cool one day if we, as like THN in itself, would go down to like a herping trip and a spidering trip.
Yeah, dude.
Um, grab, we could grab Jacob, like kicking and screaming, and make him go spidering with us. But it's like,
He'd still be herping while we were like,
yeah,
it's like you can do both at the same time, you know. And it's I know I've a lot of the cigar factories in Nicaragua, they do factory tours. A lot of the companies and stuff that make the cigars. And some of them it's like a week long thing where they
oh,
have like a
yeah,
house on a near the beach or something, and you do the factory tours for 2 or 3 days, and then there's 2 days of just hanging out. And I was talking to one of the reps actually at the shop like a week or two ago because I just there hanging out, and he came in, and he was one that was our rep when I was working there. And I was talking to him about it because I was like, we keep talking about doing this, and I want to, I'm interested in doing it. And basically, it sounds like you pay for airfare to get down there, and then
mm,
everything else is pretty much covered. Like it's really not
yeah.
anything too extreme, but
Well, I know a guy.
surely there's a way I can sneak away, within reason as far as safety and stuff goes to go
Yeah,
and poke around and see what I can find. But
I know a guy down in Nicaragua. He's a really chill herp photographer. He does tours on the side. So yeah, I mean, like all this stuff is, especially with this like Facebook and everything, it's very doable.
mhm.
It's just like, well, like I understand the hurdle because it was my first time. It's like I know how daunting it is to be like, hey, this trip is going to be a lot. Not so much South America compared to like Asia or Australia, but
Yeah.
it's just getting over that hurdle of like going to a new country per
Hmm.
se. I know I'm probably oversimplifying it just because I grew up in a multicultural, well, an Indian family and everything, and going to India, going everywhere was kind of like normal for me. But just like going elsewhere, once you get over that first trip, you're like, hey, this isn't that bad. And like
Yeah.
a trip to Peru was much cheaper than a trip to me for me to California. I was paying like $300-400 a month in Peru,
Oh,
and that
wow.
was including like living expenses, food. As long as you're not like, as long as you're not eating at like 5-star restaurants
Right.
and
Right.
everything, it's very doable. It's just that like take some time, learn some of the language, and just like you'll be solid.
Hmm. Get your shots.
Yes, don't take look into that. I took the yellow, I believe it was a yellow fever pill that because I did not sign. There was a certain time before you have to take the shot. I
Yeah.
got cocky and I'm like, you know what? I don't need that. I'll just take the pill. That pill causes nightmares. One of the ones, and I had a rough time
Jesus.
with sleeping through there. I'm sure a lot of people who have traveled to like Africa, Asia, and like South America have kind of dealt with that. But just like just be on top of your vaccination, and as well as like any kind of like yellow fever medication stuff like that. Don't be like me. Otherwise, you won't get any sleep the entire time you're over there.
Yep. Pass on that.
But it is fun though in itself. Again, like just hit on it. Like if like NRBC, I don't know where that is in Texas now.
Outside of Dallas, somewhere, I believe.
Got it. Because like I know like was it Arlington before?
It was
Like they just shut down.
Arlington, and then whoever owns the venue, I guess, decided that it was no longer going to be like a conference hall kind of thing. They were turning it,
Mhm.
from what I was told, into like an art gallery or something bizarre. So, like,
Yeah,
whatever.
but like over there again, I know Connor Wardle, I believe his
Yeah,
name is. Um, he'd be able to probably get more input, but like because
Connor's
Texas
the
is a
man.
big ass state. Yeah, Texas is a big ass state. I don't know how far it is, but like you make a trip out of like spidering and herping from an RBC, so that would be like a great first step and everything to just doing that. Because once you like get that down, it's like pretty pretty solid. I mean, I feel like that
Yeah,
would be
dude, West
fun.
Texas is a blast. It's I think it's a good to get into the sort of the swing and what to expect when you're going on a trip, especially if you're talking about something that involves a lot of walking and a lot of hiking and things like that. Like
Mhm.
West Texas is probably a pretty good primer for
Yeah.
that kind of thing, because you're also dealing with like the dry heat and that kind of stuff. It's
Hmm.
not like down in South America, I'm sure, where it's the complete opposite, where it's like it's hot but
Yeah.
it's muggy. Um, but man, we did the amount of. I wish I had put my step tracker or something on when we were in Texas, because the amount of miles we walked was just insane.
Yeah. I have a friend in Utah that I'm going to go visit. He's in med school. There is like a fun of Pamela Iotis and a couple other species over there I really want to see. But, yeah, it's just once you get into the groove of it all, like spidering and everything,
Mhm.
it's it comes as second nature. It's just like you just have to know. It's like in North America, it's more difficult to kind of see the drier species. I know some people do like the flooding method, for example. You
Mhm.
literally carry gallons of water with you out into the field and kind of get them out. It doesn't harm the spider at all because the ground soaks up the water right away. Um, but there are some like small goals that like I'd love to go to Florida sometimes. Like next year, I'm hoping to go to Daytona with you guys if that's okay.
Hell
And
yeah,
then
dude.
and then there's an orange orchard down in Florida. This supposedly has a population of Tilotocatl vagans
Yeah, I've
over
heard
there.
that.
So I really want to go there. I don't know what the legality is surrounding that, but I'm sure a nicely worded email
Yeah,
or
and talking to Phil, the biggest concern basically with that scenario is getting shot is kind of the bigger the
Yeah,
biggest
I,
concern.
I know Harry mentioned something because I don't know, like I don't know if you remember. I'm big into Thamnophis and everything. Like I
Mhm.
traveled to a couple of states this year to chase them down. That's my physical exercise for the year. Chasing Thamnophis. But I know talking to him about like, oh, I want to see like blue ribbons in this area or this area, and then he's like, yeah, that's all fine and dandy, but if you go to this area, like there's a chance like you run into these like, are they considered hillbillies in Florida? Um,
Yeah, I feel like redneck is a pretty
there
much
you go.
a
Yeah,
universal term for anyone in that.
yeah. And no offense to any of those people over there, but there's like some people that like even in like and like even in Southern Illinois, I used to go to Snake Road all
Hmm.
the time, which I highly recommend going there at some point. You run into some interesting people over there, but just like it's one of those things that like I love. Like I'm trying to knock out all the time Office on my list and everything. And yeah, Harry mentioned that like there may be some trouble with the people over there, and and it's always interesting because it's never the wildlife that's a problem.
Yeah.
It's always running into the people. It's like I'll say like when I was in Ecuador, for example, I just come my trip short because I got cocky. I'm like in my head, I'm like I'm a brown man. I speak Spanish quite fluently.
I'll blend
I
right
could
in.
blend it. Yeah,
Yeah.
blend right in. Not so like I was on the border of Ecuador and Colombia. They told me not to do this. I'm just like, well, how old was I? I was like 22, and I'm like, nah. I got this. I'm like, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I know
Right.
what I'm doing and everything. I'm hot shit. I got pistol whipped and punched in the face by this guy who was like almost a foot shorter than me. And I'm just like, I swear to God, if you didn't have a gun, I would have been able to do something. But I don't care what anybody says. If anybody points a gun at you, you loot like you will be scared.
Stuff can be
Uh,
replaced.
yeah. And he took my camera, he took my memory cards, he took my laptop, he took everything but my passport. Because like I don't care if anyone says cargo shorts are lame. They saved my entire trip uh, when I was over there. I had so many pockets. The guy didn't know what to check. Everything.
And he got
So
rolled for everything. And
yeah, except for my passport, so that saved my ass over there. But yeah, that's not dissuading me. I'm going to go back with a much smarter head on my shoulders. But yeah, that was my fun instance in Ecuador. But want to go back sometime this upcoming year or the next year. To finish that, I took a Great Milky Way photo over the Amazon River that I want to recapture. Um, Caught an anaconda there. Now I don't have any proof, and as you know, what herpers say: no photo, no proof.
yeah, picture
So
didn't happen. Yeah.
yeah, so I want to go do that, and I found some Pamphobeteus. Unfortunately, for better or for worse, I did talk to someone about the Pamphobeteus species I saw. They did ask me for a location. I thought it would be okay to trust them. I gave them the general location. 2 months later, they were in the hobby. Um, so I learned from that mistake.
Yeah, man.
Uh, Probably keep things to myself as
See,
as
and that would
much.
be a good episode for an interesting debate because that was always the thing with dart frogs was like Tamila, Tamumake, Tinctorius, the peacock.
Mhm.
Like those weren't in the U.S. and it's because they're in Brazil, so they're not getting exported.
Yeah,
But then someone imported some that were from Europe, and so it's like maybe those were smuggled into Europe. Who knows? But there's that weird sort of, again, it's an ethical crossroads of like if things are being smuggled in, but and the end game is a species is now established and it takes away the need, the demand for that smuggling to happen in the first place. Like, is it a net positive? And that
yeah,
can be a whole episode in itself. But I don't know. I don't. I think me and Phil are in agreement that when it comes to that kind of stuff, like these governments should allot a certain number of animals
yeah,
be exported, and then basically say like, here's what you get. Like maybe we'll allow a few more in 5 years, whatever. and maybe it'll help take things off. But
Yeah,
I don't know. It's tough.
as someone who's been more on the science side, I 100% agree with that. But it comes to like for like the Pamphidius, like I kind of poked at it. It's like that was a new species, so it's not described yet. And usually, what happens? Anybody could correct me if I'm wrong. Anything I say right now, because I've been out of the wildlife biology field for a few years now. I'm in biopharmaceuticals now, but it needs to be like properly described to be able to do like population studies on, and
Right.
that could then be translated to it. It's like, okay, this population is stable.
Mm-hmm.
But with tarantulas, a lot of the time, they're not
Right.
described. And that's something I need to like learn more about myself because I'm not 100% sure how that exactly works because usually exports are given by, okay, this population is doing healthy, so this country will say like, I'm going off of like example like from Dan from DM Exotics, how
Mm-hmm.
he's really like on the up and up of all the snakes and everything. Great. I would I'd love some animals from him, but regardless, that after like each country will like give like 100 like you I could export 100 scrub pythons
Mm-hmm.
from Indonesia. You can't do that with an animal that's not described that you don't know formally.
Right.
So it's like that kind of stuff. And from what I've been told, in Europe, for better or for worse, it's a lot more lax when coming into the United States. Whereas when you bring in your luggage and everything, I don't know how much international traveling you've done, but with like
Does the
bringing it in,
Bahamas count?
yes, uh, I think,
Barely.
uh,
I don't think it does.
but they will thoroughly search you when you leave and when you get in the country. Whereas I have heard,
They're not
and
going to
yes,
search
sir,
everywhere. They're not going to find what they're looking for. They're
there's
not
a
going
lot
to
of
find it
jokes
until I
about
want them to find it. How about that?
there's a lot of jokes behind that. Warren, he's a keeper in New York, friends with Tom Patterson. Running joke. He has a pocket that a lot of things fit in, but yeah, but but with these tarantulas, for example, especially the Pamphidius, because that's what I mainly look at. Uh, you have it's like we don't know the population per se of this because it's called species like Platyoma, which is like name of a completely different genus.
Yeah.
Legacies. So it's like, okay, and we don't know. It's like, is this the same species as this, or is it different? We don't have the locality information for that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like we're not able to tell that. And same with Xenesis, because we have species of orange. And then, and for what I've been told, again, correct me if I'm wrong, in Europe, when you're coming back into the country, it's not as hard as they look at you for that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And so that's why a lot of tarantula species, new species, end up in Europe first. And then they're coming into the United States because there's that kind of gap where they're not looking for invertebrates
Right.
as much. Nobody really cares about like, oh, is there a spiderling that's like 1 centimeter long?
Mm-hmm.
You know, thing. They probably don't care about that. But the United States, if you do the same thing, you best believe you're going to be searched. I accidentally carried when I was going to Peru. I was accidentally given PCR vials in a microcentrifuge tube,
Mm-hmm.
and the professor forgot to give me a permit for that. I got I got detained on suspicion for bio warfare. I was in South America. Mind you, I'm like 19 years old, stuck being asked questions and everything. I'm just like, I need an adult realization. I am an adult now.
Yeah.
I can't do
I
that.
can't
But
talk to
yeah,
you until you call my parents.
yeah, but yeah. So it's its whole thing, and there could be the whole debate of like which species would be in the hobby if everything was done ethically.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
India, I've heard claim they didn't agree any exportation of any tarantulas whatsoever. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the validity of that.
Well, the way
Because
that,
there's
that Smith explained it in the doc was like with Metallica in particular is like a lot of that stuff was never listed CITES, so no one ever thought that it would be an issue. And so a lot of that stuff got shipped out, and then they realized
that
like,
makes
oh, wait
sense.
a second, we're not seeing these anymore, like we probably
Yeah.
need to stop.
Or I think what happens more so is that they realize it picks up in popularity in other parts of the country. I mean,
Mhm.
other parts of the world, and they're like, "Oh, we need to stop this." And unfortunately, not all governments are non-corrupt,
Right.
in a sense. So, like, sometimes like they see something that's not profiting them directly, they
Mhm.
want to kind of put a like halt on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very interesting topic. I have some friends that are reptile guys in India that I'm always talking about. I think I made mention of some like when you sent me a message about going herping in India or something or looking at that. I have a couple friends in mind, which I'm totally down if you'd like to. They found Poecilotheria. They found Poecilotheria in an area where they're not really. There's no information they've been found in before.
Mhm.
Could be a new species. I found it. I saw a photo of it on a fridge, so I'm calling Poecilotheria species fridge. Um, but it'll be interesting to see. Just need to learn the local language because I don't speak any South Indian languages right now.
Yeah,
You
that's a whole thing
speak
in itself.
speaking English will get you farther in South India than speaking Hindi. But that's an interesting topic.
That's
But
good.
I am down if you guys ever want to do a THN spidering trip
Absolutely.
anywhere.
Does scorpions fall into that? 'Cause you
Yeah,
can't
scorpions are a lot
scorpioning is
easier.
not the same as finding
Yeah,
scorpions.
scorpions. At least when last time I was in India, they're a lot. Unlike tarantulas, unfortunately, they're more easy. They're more adaptable to human environments, similar to
Mhm.
like cobras. Like, excuse me. When I was in India as a kid, for better or for worse, my first snake experiences were with venomous snakes, like Russell vipers, the species of nausea, and everything.
Mhm.
Just because they were around, and like my family were all always say like, no, they're not there. As a kid, I'm like, I'm gonna prove you wrong. You flip over bricks because normal people don't flip over bricks. They don't flip over a tin looking for these animals. Herpers do. Um, I found them over there, and I would move them for better or for worse. As like an 11-year-old, I would harass them. I know better now that I'm older. Wasn't smart at all. But I would find lots of scorpions. I don't remember what they look like, so I'm not going to even hazard a guess of what they were. But scorpions, in my opinion, from what I've seen, they're more adaptable than tarantulas. Unlike Poecilotheria, for example, that require certain types of like trees or habitats, they're able
Mhm.
to like survive. Similar to the analogy I like to make is with like leopards, for example. Leopards are able to easily adapt to city environments in India. Um, they're able to switch their prey focus to like pigs, cows, and stuff that are
Yeah,
in
more
city
domesticated
limits.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and scorpion they will thrive off of like what's the most common insect you think of when you think of human within
Roaches.
human like yeah they're
Yeah.
probably able to like feed off that. There's plenty of them over there. Um, Snakes too, like Russell vipers, for example. They're really common in my mom's village, where she
Mhm.
grew up. They're in fact the most
Gnarly
venomous snake
snakes.
bites over there. Yeah, which
Yeah.
is kind of terrifying, knowing that I probably messed around with someone when I was a little kid, not knowing what they were. Um, but yeah, it's all these like it's just I don't know. It's just very interesting to think about. Like to kind of tie back, it's like these more common species you would kind of like think of like in the pet trade, and then seeing them in the wild, seeing where they're found in the wild, and be like, oh, because like you normally don't think of like for example, like let's say Russell vipers, you kind of like think of in your head like a picturesque kind of like environment where they're found in.
Right.
No, you can find them right outside your toilet door in some parts of India
Yeah, I
and
believe it,
everything.
man.
And it's just
It's
like, yeah, it's just like those kinds of things that like
yeah.
it's like reality. I mean, no, it's like what you perceive and then reality.
Yeah. Yeah. We are at the 2.5 hour mark, man.
We went. It doesn't feel like that, but like I'm
I
pretty.
know it goes
Yeah,
by. It goes by
yeah,
quick, man.
yeah. I'm really excited for this podcast and see what the future beholds.
You and me both, man. We will schedule episode 2 here soon. I don't know if THP is happening Thursday or not. I know Flippington is not. They kicked that can to next week. But we will make an announcement as soon as we know when things are happening. FullViewsApparel.com. Check it out. Use the code THN. Get 15% off your order. Shirts, hats, stuff added all the time. New designs. I'm constantly working on stuff when I have spare time to do it. And thank you. We'll see y'all later.